Kathy, we are live.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to a virtual meeting of the City of Dublin Architectural Review Board. The Ohio legislature passed several emergency laws to address the pandemic, including the ability for public entities to have virtual meetings. We appreciate this ability to maintain our continuity of government. For the present time, we are holding our meetings online and live streaming those meetings on YouTube. You can access the live stream off the city's website. The meeting procedure for each case this evening will begin first with a staff presentation, followed by an opportunity for the applicant to make any presentation or comments. The board will then have the opportunity to ask clarifying questions prior to hearing any public comments. Finally, the board will deliberate on each case. In order to submit comments or questions during the meeting, please use the form under the streaming video on the city's website. These questions and comments will be relayed to the board by the meeting moderator. We want to accommodate public participation to the greatest extent possible and welcome your comments on cases. Please use a valid name and address when submitting your comments and refrain from making any inappropriate comments. This is not a perfect system, and we appreciate your patience. So if you would, we're now going to say the Pledge of Allegiance. So we'll wait for the flag to get presented. Okay. All right, please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, roll call, please.
Mr. Alexander.
Here.
Ms. Bryan.
Here.
Mr. Cotter.
Here.
Mr. Kanacki.
Here.
Ms. Cram. Cram.
You're muted.
Yes, I'm here.
All right, thank you. Now I would like a motion to accept the documents and approve the minutes. If there's any concern on either document, please say so. Otherwise, we can do this jointly. So if all is approved or meets your approval, then someone please make a motion.
I'll make the motion to approve both sets of documents.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right.
Mr. Cotter. Mr. Cotter.
Yes.
Ms. Bryan.
Yes.
Mr. Alexander.
Yes.
Ms. Cram.
Yes.
Mr. Kanacki.
Yes.
All right, thank you. The Architectural Review Board is responsible for review of construction and modification or alteration to any site in the review district or area subject to architectural review under the provision of Zoning Code Section 153.177. The board has the decision-making responsibility on these cases. A swearing in of anyone who intends to address the board on any of these cases is necessary. So anyone intending to address the board on cases, please stand, raise your right hand, and answer in the affirmative. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony to this board?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. All right, we have two cases that we're looking at as consent cases. If any of the board members would like to pull that either case, please say so. Otherwise, we're going to go forward. The consent agenda is intended to allow for expedited approval of cases where the board, staff, and applicant are in agreement with all conditions of approval. Any board member may remove a case from the consent agenda. We have two cases eligible for consent agenda this evening. Case 1, which is number 19-094, the knee residence extension request, and case 4, number 20-152, Magnolia sign. Does anyone wish to pull either of these cases from consent? Okay. Staff, do we have any public comments on either of these cases?
We do not.
All right. So then we just move on down. We don't have to do anything. The consent agenda items stand approved. Do we vote on these each? No?
Yeah, so you'll need to read both of those items
Okay.
in separately and then vote.
Okay. All right. This is new for us. This application is a request for, it's the knee residence at 55 South Riverview Street, request for an extension. This application is a request for a 6-month extension of a previously approved board order for case 19-094-ARB-MPR that most recently went before the ARB on November 20th, 2019. The approved application was for an addition to a detached garage. The .40 acre site is zoned Bridge Street District Historic Residential and is southwest of the intersection of South Riverview Street with Spring Hill Lane. Mr. Ridge is available to answer any questions this evening. Any questions? Okie dokie. Do we have a motion to approve the extension of this minor project?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay.
Mr. Cotter,
Yes.
Ms. Bryan, Mr. Alexander,
Yes.
Ms. Cram,
Yes.
Mr. Kanaki.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. The next case was originally case number 4, Magnolia at 119 South High Street. This application is a request for the installation of a 5.5 square foot projecting sign for an existing tenant space zoned Bridge Street District Historic South and located west of South High Street, approximately 125 feet north of the intersection with John Wright Lane. Mr. Zach is available to answer any questions. Any questions? All right, motion to approve.
I'll move to approve with the 2 conditions in the report.
I'll second.
Okay,
Excuse me, Kathy,
yes.
this is Gary. Before we vote, should we ask the applicant if they are okay with the conditions?
Okay, we can do that. Absolutely. Applicant here? Hi. You're on mute. You're on mute.
I'm fine with the conditions.
Okay, thank you. Good catch, Gary. Thank you. All right. Motion to approve with the 2 conditions?
Ms. Cram,
Yes.
Mr. Kanaki,
Yes.
Mr. Cotter,
Yes.
Mr. Alexander,
Yes.
Ms. Bryan.
Yes. All right, thank you. All right, the consent agenda items stand approved, and we appreciate the applicant's attendance this evening. Consent agenda applicants are welcome to leave the meeting. Thank you very much. All right, the next case is an informal review. We very much appreciate these informal reviews. I think it helps make the process more palatable for everyone. So the first case is case number 2. Is it the Beckert? Is that the pronunciation? Residence at 156 South High Street?
Correct.
Thank you. This application is a request for feedback on the proposed construction of a 2-story single-family home on a .24 acre site zoned Bridge Street District Historic Residential. The site is east of South High Street, approximately 100 feet south of the intersection with John Wright Lane. Mr. Ridge will be our presenter, and he will give you a moment to pull your slides up.
Thank you. All right, good evening. As was mentioned, this is a request for informal review and non-binding feedback for the proposed construction of a single-family, new construction single-family home at 156 South High Street in the Historic District. The approximately quarter-acre site is highlighted in yellow on your screen here. You can see it's on the south side, or excuse me, the east side of South High Street, immediately southeast of John Wright Lane. I'll briefly go over the history here. I'm sure some of you are pretty familiar with this site at this point, but in February 2019, this site, in conjunction with 158 South High, immediately to the south, came for an informal review for demolition and 3 new residential units. In June 2019, the ARB approved demolition and informally reviewed 2 single-family homes. And then in September of 2019, the ARB approved a new single-family home, which you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen here. So these photos provide some context of the surrounding properties. 1 and 2 are immediately across the street on the west side of South High Street. Number 3 is immediately north of the site in question. And then number 4 is immediately south. So again, that's 158 South High Street. There we go. And then this photo just shows, again, the existing conditions of the site. As I'm sure you are aware, it's the two-family home was demolished, and construction of the single-family home on 158 South High Street has begun. So this is the proposed site plan. You'll see here that drive access is retained to the north of the site, so that curb cut is not proposed to change. The applicant is proposing a side load garage and turnaround area on the north side of the property and towards the rear of the home. The L-shaped home is oriented closer to South High Street as well as to the south property line. The applicant is proposing a significantly sized deck at the rear of the home and a front porch on the front of the home close to South High Street. The applicant is also proposing a stone wall, which is a little difficult to see here, but the stone wall would run at the front property line along South High Street as well. This proposal calls for approximately 43% lot coverage. So as you're probably aware, code permits a maximum lot coverage of 50% currently. This is the proposed front or west elevation. You'll notice that the applicant is proposing a full 2-story home, single-family home. This elevation is typified by its front gable and significant prominent front porch. The applicant is proposing a number of materials on this elevation, including stone, shake siding, standing seam metal roofing, as well as asphalt roofing. The applicant is proposing a variety of window styles on this elevation, including ganged 2/2 windows, single 2/2 windows with transom, as well as a bullseye window. The applicant on this elevation, you can see, is proposing decorative finials along the roof line there, and a pendant style light under the front entryway. The consultant did recommend, made a couple recommendations for this elevation in particular. These include installing single 2/2 windows rather than the ganged 2/2 windows, removing the bullseye window and finials, and ensuring the stone wall, which you can see at the bottom of the elevation here, ensuring that's built in a dry laid manner with locally quarried stone to match stone walls immediately to the south of this site. So this is the proposed north or side elevation. You'll notice here that this elevation is typified by the two prominent side gables. From east to west, this elevation includes a deep front porch with a diamond paned window. There is a bay window proposed on the side gable closest to South High Street. An overhang and pedestrian entry further to the east, just west of the two-car garage. The applicant is proposing a large bay window on the second gable form, as well as a wall of windows, and a large raised deck at the rear of the property. You'll notice here the applicant is proposing a stone water table, as well as shake siding on the majority of the elevation here. And this is the south or other side elevation. So in this elevation, you'll see many of those same details, including the stone water table, the shake siding, and the two prominent gable forms. The applicant is also proposing a significantly sized cupola, which brings the total height of the structure to approximately 40 feet, which is approximately 5 feet taller than code would permit. For these elevations, the consultant did make a number of recommendations. These include redesigning and realigning windows for a simpler pattern across the elevations, removing faux historicisms such as the diamond paned window, and redesigning or relocating the chimney, which you can see on this elevation, to reduce and minimize its overall size and mass. And then what you're seeing here is the east or rear elevation. So this elevation contains side and front gables, which form the rear portion of the home. Again, you can see the chimney here in the cupola. The front gable has a series of 2/2 windows with transom. And you can see here the same materials are used on this elevation as the other three. The consultant recommended an overall redesign of this elevation to be more compatible with adjacent building forms, which is outlined in the consultant review. Finally, we've got 3 discussion questions here. Does the board support this proposed site layout? Does the board support the proposed mass and scale of the home? Does the board support the conceptual architectural character and details of the home? And then finally, any other considerations by the board? I'm happy to answer any questions you all may have, and the applicant is also in attendance tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the applicant have any remarks?
Excuse me, no, not this time. I think I just will sit back and just kind of hear what kind of feedback we have from you guys.
Okay. Mr. Carr, anything from you?
Clarification, Chase, there was some question on what's the height of the structure. I know from one side you've got 40 and it was not so clear in your report. From the front, I think the applicant has 34, but from the back it's certainly higher. How are we measuring that, just so I'm clear?
So maybe Jenny or Nikki, if you have anything to add, but so from the front elevation, it's shown at, I believe, almost 34 feet in height. I think in the report I did mention that is actually incorrectly measured per code. It would actually be measured at the midpoint of the eaves. In terms of the rear, so the cupola is at approximately 40 feet in height. Again, Jenny or Nikki, maybe if you could clarify which would be considered the actual height.
Yeah, so the height is measured from the established grade to the midpoint of the eaves, like Chase described. That dimension is not provided on the conceptual elevations that were provided to the board tonight. That being said, the applicant did provide those overall heights to the top, the peak of the roof, which generally those numbers would exceed what the measured height is.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I had a follow-up question in that area. And does our zoning code specify on sites where you have a slope where the measurement is the code from any location, or is the code restriction from at the primary grade at the primary elevation at the street front? So some codes do differentiate. I didn't go back and research this, but it could impact whether or not a variance is required.
Yeah, and we would definitely review that prior to this coming to you formally. My understanding of the code is that it would be measured from grade, and we would review both the street facing elevation as well as the rear of the home.
So Nicole, if I look at it just from the rear and I see the projection and I see the front gable, the front gable, and it's, Chase, it's probably also close to 40 feet from the back. Would that be considered too high? I think to Gary's point, if I'm looking from the back and that the front gable is too high, would that be counted? Would that need to be 35 feet looking from the rear?
Yeah.
No. Okay.
Yeah, I think it was just the cupola is what put it over the top. Am I correct in that reading?
It is, yeah.
Right. So I thought I read.
But if I look at it just from grade, the front gable actually is taller if you look from the back, if you look all the way from the back. Just want to make sure the cupola would be the only thing that would be measured from the back grade.
So the entire rear elevation would be measured from the back grade.
Okay.
And yes, we would measure the cupola from the rear and not from the front.
And then the front, let's say the front north-south gable would just be measured from the front. Okay, clear. And then,
Sean, excuse me.
I just have one more. One more clarification question, just only because as we talk about generally, because about 3 houses south of this, maybe 4, and I forget if it's 130 or 190. It's also a 2-story structure and there. Any reason we didn't have that picture in here? Just because its mass looks more like this one. It goes south. I can't remember the numbers, 130 or 190.
No, I mean, no particular reason. Okay. We were just using the immediately adjacent properties.
Okay. Go ahead, Gary.
I had a question. Chase, the stone wall, another part of the city staff brought to us the thoughts of stone wall along the street. Where does that stand? And would that potentially be in conflict with something proposed here?
I'll probably have to default to Jenny on that one. I'm not sure of the status of that project. So maybe Jenny, can you clarify where that stands?
So based on the comments of ARB, those were obviously taken in by our Parks and Rec department, and they were then revisiting the overall design of that. So, and I believe even your recommendations on this side of the street was that those not even be included at all. So, and if it was, that was going to be a significantly later phase. So they would work through that if that ever did come to fruition.
Okay, thanks.
And Mr. Alexander, just to confirm, the city project did not extend this far south.
Okay. Thank you. I have a question for the applicant. Without additional drawings, it's hard to tell what the floor to ceiling heights are on the first floor, particularly the street elevation. What are the floor to ceiling heights?
Tim, you want to go ahead and answer that for me? Just to be so we're specific. You're on mute.
You're right.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
All right, yeah, first floor is 10 feet, 10-foot flat until you get back to the kitchen and dining room, the 1-story. That's a volume ceiling. And then the second floor is a 8-foot ceiling.
And is the 10 feet floor to ceiling or floor to floor?
Floor to ceiling.
Okay, thanks.
I'm sorry, the second floor is 9-foot floor to ceiling.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions from the board for staff or applicants?
Sure, I just had one. On the north and south facades, was that board and batten also being used? Did I see that correct, Chase, in the drawings?
Yeah, it would appear as though board and batten would also be used on those elevations.
Gotcha. So we're at least four materials on those 2 elevations?
The stone shake siding and the board and batten, yes.
Stone shake siding. Is there brick or is it just a stone facade on those sides? I can't remember. I can pull it up here, I suppose.
I believe that's just stone on those facades. Yep.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Thanks.
Any other questions from the board? Okay, do we have any public comments?
We do not have any public comment.
Okay, then we're going to walk through the informal consideration questions. So does the board support the proposed site layout? So kind of along with this, the historic Dublin guidelines provide guidance regarding the location of new construction in relation to surrounding properties. Specifically, the guidelines identify that new buildings in the district should be designed to fit into the strong existing context. So we're talking about site layout, including home, deck, stone wall, and driveway locations.
So I think I can start on that one. So I think the layout where it fits on the area looks okay. Certainly pushed to the front, but as you walk down there, most of them are quite close to the front of the property. So if I just look at if we're just talking about the layout, for me, I don't have too many questions specifically on the layout, because it looks like it more or less fits in if you walk down the street and look at the other ones, maybe a little closer than the other ones. But from that standpoint, I didn't see an issue on that side, on that specific question.
Thank you, Sean.
I can go. As far as the layout, again, it looks like they're within all of the setbacks that are required. If we're counting the driveways part of layout, I have the same concern we did with the adjacent one about the grade and whether they're going to need a retaining wall and whether they'd have to be able to fit that retaining wall in there. So that, because I know the lot immediately next to it has the same kind of grade and they did need a retaining wall. This doesn't show anything about a retaining wall. And then as far as the layout of the stone wall, I'm fine with putting a stone wall there, but it has to be, if there's going to be one, it has to be the dry lay with the bookshelf top to match the historic ones that are normally down there. I think that covers all you classified as layout.
Thank you, Amy. Frank?
Yeah, I mean, my main thing was the stone wall, making sure it didn't match the existing, that's further south. And I'd also thought about, it was only a few months back, we were talking about the house just south of it and the driveway issues. But I think, Amy spoke to that. I know Gary could speak to more detail than I could on that for sure. Otherwise, yeah, I'm good.
Okay, and I echo the comments that were made regarding the stone wall and the driveway concerns.
I will weigh in on the site layout.
Okay.
I think this is one of the most logical site layouts we've seen. We've heard from a lot of residents. They want the backs of these properties open and they want to retain the open space across the properties. and this is one project that's doing that. I think this slope seems to be more gradual than the other proposals that have come before us with the sloping driveway. And I think the garage is in the right location. I like the idea of the stone wall. I think it's a nice gesture. So the site layout, I'm very comfortable with.
Thank you, Gary. All right. Any questions from the applicant regarding those remarks?
No.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to number 2. Does the board support the proposed mass and scale of the home? The Historic Dublin Guideline provides recommendations regarding the overall character, building, scale, and mass and development patterns. Mass, form, and lot coverage should be similar to surrounding buildings within the neighborhood and should add to the continuity and compatibility of the neighborhood. So with that being said, who would like to start their thoughts about mass and scale?
Okay, since nobody's, did somebody else, Frank, you want to?
I would say no for me.
Oh, go ahead, Sean. Sorry, we're stepping on each other.
No, for me, certainly if you look at it and as you walk around there, it's a bit hard to tell about how high the roof line is if you look at that, because the other buildings around it look more, they're sat at grade, and on this one it looked like the porch is raised up a few feet. So certainly the front of the building, I was trying to visualize 35 feet out there. Certainly, for me, it looks like it's going to be noticeably bigger than some of the buildings beside it. But otherwise, I think from looking at it from the side, and how much, I think as Gary said, having the space in the back and the other thing. So for me, the front, just the way it's going to lay out with the let's say it's 3 gables sitting out in the front, would look. I didn't see another house around there that looked exactly like that. And I think with it being a little bit above grade and just how it's going to look along that grade, it feels to me, it's hard to visualize, but it feels to me like it's too high in the way that second gable going north and south is going to look. And I think it would look out of scale for me with the other homes around there. I'm not opposed to it being 2 stories, but it feels like it's going to be bigger than everything that looks around that. So if I just look at the front scaling along both sides, I thought what we've seen in the last couple, I thought the just from a mass and a forming standpoint, I thought it looked okay. Looking from, let's say, the north and the south elevations. I think the architectural things will come to next. I think the consultant had some good views about that. But scaling, I think it looks a bit from the front, looks like there might be too much there from the height, and then both of those or all 3 of those gables there. So my first thoughts there.
Thank you, Sean. Gary?
I have very similar thoughts to Sean's. I agree with him. I think the consultant's report sort of cherry-picked houses to compare this to. So I don't think that was completely fair, because the closest house I think Sean is referring to is it's red, it's across the street, and it's a blank, straight 2-story facade. And then if you go south on the other side of the street, there's a brick house, an older brick house that it is also 2 stories. So I don't have a problem with the 2 stories, but I am concerned with the height. And I personally would use probably that red house as the limit. And what that house did is they actually brought the fascia down. For the non-design professionals, that's the trim that the gutter's mounted to. They brought that down so it's right at the top of the windows to help lower. And that was the purpose of my question earlier too about the floor to ceiling heights in the front of the house, because like Sean, I noticed this is maybe 5 steps, which is potentially 2.5 feet off grade. So there are ways, I think, to bring the house down, whether it's reduced the number of steps off grade, whether it's reduced the floor to ceiling height in the front, that you could still retain the 2-story look, but it wouldn't need to be as tall as it is currently. In terms of the massing at the back, I don't agree with with our consultant. I think there's skill in the way there's continuity established while the masses break down. And so I think you do want the mass of a house to break down as it moves to the rear. And that height that we refer to is at the cupola, which is not at the very rear. The mass steps down towards the rear. So the structure actually gets lower as it moves to the rear property line and the grade drops. So I think the massing as it goes from front to back is very nice as well. So it's just, for me, scale and massing, it's just the height. It can be 2 stories, but for me, I would use that structure is probably as high as it should go. The red house.
Thank you, Gary. Amy?
Yeah, I would say that I agree the mass seems a little high. It could be the steepness, the pitch of the roof maybe could be lowered. There could be things to tweak it to make it look, it could be 2 stories but shorter still, or keep it at 1.5. I don't know, another thing to compare it to, it's gonna be very close to the other new build that we're putting in there, and I don't remember how high that one was. But it's going to be extremely noticeable next to the one that's being built. So I think maybe when this comes back, we should know the height of the one that's being built right next to it. That will help. But as a general rule, I'm not saying it can't be 2-story. It's just whatever the overall height ends up being, it needs to be in comparison to those around them. Yeah, across the street, there's a 2-story. About 3 houses down is a 2-story. So it just, but yeah, the height is really the only issue. As far as the north-south elevation, the scale and mass on those are fine. I would X the cupola on there and just get rid of that height and wouldn't have that problem anyway. But that's more of a architect. That's kind of more that gets into the next question.
Thank you, Amy. Frank?
Yeah, actually, Amy just hit excuse me, on what I was going to say. With that, you'd almost have to take the mass and scan of this house with the new house that's going up to the south that we voted on, whatever, 6 months ago, whenever pandemic time, it's hard to say. But just looking at that one with this one, because they are going to be so close that it's going to be impossible to look at one without it comparing it to the other or overshadowing, relating, that nature. So I'd just say that, that has to be considered in the mass and scale.
Thank you. So I echo everything that's been said, but one additional thing. I think that it's really important for you to look at the drawings of the house, the new house that's going in next door, because we had a previous case, the houses currently exist, where they were built, there was no looking at what the other one was doing, and both of their dining room windows look into each other. So you don't want to have so I would really look at window placements and what that's going to be looking into. So your windows aren't looking into their windows. You might want to avoid that because it's pretty unpleasant when you're over at their house and you really you're like 6 feet from their window looking right into everything that's going on. So so I would look at those kinds of things since you are going to be so close. All right.
Thank you.
All right, so the next question is, does the board support the conceptual architectural character and details of the home? The BSD Code and Historic Dublin Design Guidelines provide guidance about the architectural character, materials, and details for new construction. Specifically, the guidelines identify that the most appropriate designs for new buildings take account of the context and make an effort to respect it and fit in visually. So with that said, who would like to start the discussion?
I can go again. That's okay.
Sure, thank you.
So let me look at my notes here. So a couple of thoughts. I think the consultant had a few points, but certainly I think as we look at the front side, and I think Frank hit on it before. There's on each side there's quite a number of different let's say types of materials. So if you look at the rest of the houses around there, they tend to have one or let's say two at the most. So I think that just the outside, just from a material selection, certainly could have some simplification on there. And certainly the architect or the consultant came up with a few things about how the windows are, where a better placement of the windows in the front, how they are more aligned together. Making sure it was on the north side, bay windows is at the appropriate place for bay windows. So I think generally I didn't have issues. I mean, board and batten versus some other things, I'm not so concerned, but I think having these multiple layers of materials really detracts from something that's a bit more cleaner and actually fits a bit more into the character of the rest of the neighborhood around there. Yeah, and I think also the cupola at the back, it might look kind of pretty, but it certainly adds to the height of that. And we talked a bit about the grade in the front, just how the front porch I think could look. I think if that was at grade like the porch, I think it's 3 or 4 houses to the south. I think it feel like it'd make it a bit of a cleaner line, and as I think as Gary said, it kind of lower the whole mass, and it make the whole thing look like there weren't so many different elevations in the whole mass of the house, and as an architectural design, I think it'd just make it look cleaner and make it fit a little bit closer. Well, I didn't think about it. I think looking at the house beside it and what they're putting on there to make them somehow be closer, not the same, but certainly having a similar architectural, accoutrement feel was probably important also.
Thank you, Sean.
That's it for me.
Thanks.
All right, I'll chime in. I had two general issues with the submission, and the one we covered was the height. But the other one is our code starts with that statement: the buildings in Dublin are characterized as simple vernacular buildings. And I think, and I'm glad your design professional is on the call with us, because I think he'll get what a simple vernacular building is, because there are a lot of details, and that's where our consultant's report, I think she's identified so many of those details. The bullseye window, I think the gable material, the material change in the gables is not something that you'd see in a simple vernacular building. The slope of the porch in front, the shed roof on that porch, a shallower slope would be something you'd more likely see on a porch on a simple vernacular building. Even the arch on that porch. So I think, and the diamond windows that were pointed out. So I think there are a lot of details that you would not see in a simple vernacular building that I think if those are removed and simplified, and maybe even the finials on the roof are another one. If those are simplified, removed, I think the house then begins to look like it's more of a vernacular tradition. I don't have difficulty with the multiple materials because we've approved multiple materials in some of the other new houses. So in fact, I think they're better composed here than they are in some of the other cases. Ganged windows, while the consultant has a point, we've approved gang windows very recently. So it doesn't seem to me fair to approve that in one setting and deny it here, because even though some of the windows are ganged, what does work here is the continuity of window type, and that helps to I think unify the elevations. One of my pet peeves is you use shutters in some windows and shutters and not others. Well, that's here in the front. We approved that in another project. So you can't. And the bay windows, these are simple bays. These are box bays. We approved those in another project. Yeah, the consultant says they shouldn't be there. Well, I think they're well composed. We've approved them before. I think those things that are in the report, it's not fair to suggest need to be removed here when we didn't do that elsewhere. One other, everything else seems pretty well selected except the railing system at the deck. I mean, that's a pretty contemporary railing system, just a cable rail system with a house that is coming out of some kind of tradition. So I would just, and maybe that's just a detail that hasn't been considered yet, but I think that's an important detail to be factored as well. So, I mean, I think going back to just simple vernacular building, but I think it's elements of this are extremely well composed, and I want to applaud your architect for that skill. So,
Thank you, Gary.
Thanks.
Okay, I can go. Again, I'm going to actually, that's the one thing I had in bold real big was simplify. I don't have issue with any one particular architectural element you're putting in. It's the fact that you're throwing them in all together. So if you want this to have an essence of Greek revival, then keep the corner returns. But then Greek revival would never have the bullseye motif, like the bullseye window, you know? So what you've done is you've taken like a craftsman element of maybe these bay windows or something like that, and you've put them, so you've taken all of these architectural types and thrown them all together. Any one of them would be fine on their own. If you want to do a craftsman type theme and keep those elements, then keep them. If you, like I said, want the Greek revival, keep those, but just don't throw them all together. And if you do that, if you remove those that are kind of incompatible with the other architecture type, then it's simplified. So again, no issue with any one in particular, just don't throw them together. The cupola, don't really get the whole barn conversion thing that was in the letter. I would, in my personal opinion, I would X that. But I do agree. I agreed with Gary that I thought the rear deck was too modern for again, I'm fine if you want to go contemporary looking on this building. Just make it all contemporary. So just pick one. And that also applies to your materials. Again, if you were doing a shingle designed house, the 3 materials on the front and the bullseye window are perfectly fine. So just go with pick one that you like and go with that, and then I'm fine.
Thanks, Amy. Frank?
Yeah, actually, I was kind of thinking the same thing with Amy. They, like the bullseye window in particular, I know the consultant really didn't like it, but I thought it was a nice focal point. But the problem is with everything, it gets so busy when you're looking at the house. You are seeing different styles all at once from the finials. She mentioned the big pendant light. We don't really have a detail, so we can't tell what the pendant would be. But it does look like it would probably be pretty big, doing to scale to the drawing. I don't have a necessary issue with like the board and batten on the sides, but I fear that is becoming like such an in vogue material that houses today built with them 20 years from now, people are looking and go, oh, that's a house from 20 years ago because it has board and batten. It just seems like more and more we're seeing it with houses over and over. It's not something I would necessarily strike down your house because, but I would just consider it when you're going into your final plans. Otherwise, I think everything else was said. I don't mind the 15 feet back. I think that's probably about where the other house sat, as I recall. That'd be something else to look at, what the house to the south, how far back that one is. Otherwise, I think everybody else has said everything I thought of already, if not more.
Thank you. So my impression was there was just too much going on. So, I mean, the professionals on the board said it more distinctly, but there was like, I wasn't sure where to look. There was just too much going on. So simplify however that works for you. And I didn't get the cupola thing either. Cute, but yeah. Wasn't sure what you're going for there. Okay. Those are our questions. Do the applicants have any questions or need clarification?
No, I think from my perspective, I'm good. Tim, I don't know if you have anything, but again, thank you for your time and your feedback. Greatly appreciate it.
Well, thank you for coming at this point rather than further down the road. And you can do this again in informal. Sometimes we've done too, if that makes it easier for you.
Sounds good. We'll be back.
Mr. Carr, did you have any?
Yeah, what really is driving the height is the grade, and that's a 9-foot basement. We talked about the first floor and the second floor, but it's a 9-foot basement, and that keeps us from having to change the grade. So that's really the reaction to that, which then creates the higher front porch, a little higher than what we would usually have. Instead of 3 steps, we've got 5. I guess my question is, on the height, 35-foot max is what they require, and we're at 34 on the front. And how much lower would it need to be, I guess? It sounds like we need to find out the height of the new house next door and the red house across the street. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think, yeah, context is everything. So I think looking at the height of those, what we don't want is for your house, lovely as it is, to look like it's sitting up higher than all of the rest of them.
Okay. So just a height relative. Yeah, and as far as the cupola in the back, that's 6 feet taller than the gable or the peak that it sits on. And the whole reason for that third material is, like in the letter, it's the old barn that was moved there, and it just accents that, which I hear about the trendiness of it, but board and batten's been used for a long time, so I don't feel I don't feel it's a negative to have some board and batten on there, even as the third material, for what it's worth.
Yeah, we're seeing it.
But overall, I do. Pardon?
We're seeing it pretty consistently on new builds.
Yeah, I am too. But it has plenty of historical reference. I don't think it'll feel like it was built 20 years ago or during a trend. So
okay,
those were most of the things I had. And the cupola was really designed to make it more authentic, like an old barn. And what I tried to do is keep that below the main ridge on the front, which is really what you see.
Mm-hmm.
I know that height goes up to 39.8. But I was mostly concerned with the height from the street level to the ridge, not to exceed that 35 feet. But I do. I mean, good news is the same builder that's general contractor is building the new house, so we can find out what that ridge height is fairly easily.
Good.
Kathy, I just want to add something about this height. I just don't want them to be penalized because the 2 new homes in the neighborhood have chosen to create relatively small 1.5-story expressions at the front. And that's the case of the house adjacent to them. And that's the case of the house we recently approved. They're 1.5 stories, but they're not even going to be as prominent in height at the front as Mr. Billy Steele or the yellow building, So this will be taller than those adjacent structures. So and it's going to stand out a little bit, but I don't think they should be penalized because those were not historic buildings. Those are new buildings, and those owners decided to intentionally make them low. They weren't. So I think that's, to be fair, you just need to evaluate it in that context.
Okay. That makes sense.
Do we have any public comments on this? Jenny?
Sorry, we do not.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, if there's nothing further, we will see you next time.
Thank you again.
Yeah, I do have a question, Catherine. Sure. As far as the comments that were made tonight, are we going to get something in writing. I've been taking notes here. And then we resubmit this for a final review.
Yeah, you can work with staff. The minutes will be published on this, and Mr. Ridge will work with you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Thanks.
All right, we're ready for case number 3, Tucci's. Need Mr. Barnum. Mr. Barnum?
Are we on mute?
We need Mr. Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Nikki,
Okay,
you're
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Just can't see you. Okay, thank you.
Oh, I haven't touched anything. Okay, so do I need to start my video here?
Yeah, you can start your.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so case number 3, Tucci's at 35 North High Street. This is an informal review. This application is a request for feedback on the proposed construction of an approximately 215 square foot wine room addition to the existing restaurant on a 0.23 acre site zoned Bridge Street District Historic Core. The site is west of North High Street, approximately 150 feet south of North Street. So Nikki, I'll give you a minute and then you can get going.
Great, thank you. Good evening. As mentioned, this is a request for informal review and feedback for a property located on the west side of North High Street. This property is zoned Bridge Street District Historic Core. This is the surrounding context of the existing restaurant. You'll notice a variety of architectural styles, all of which are occupied by commercial development. This is the existing site. You'll notice here that the structure built in 1955 is located on the western portion of the site with a large patio to the east along North High Street. Wing Hill is located to the south of the restaurant, and a city-owned parcel which contains a pedestrian walkway is located to the north. This is the proposed floor plan for the existing restaurant. You'll notice the faded area is the outdoor patio, and the gray area is the existing restaurant, with the red area proposed to be the wine room expansion. This is an expansion that is about 215 feet in size and is located to the north of the building, adjacent to that public walk. This building is a concrete block construction. The applicant is proposing to do a lean-to shed roof addition. This addition will be clad in vertical cedar board and batten siding and finished in a downy color to match the existing structure. The applicant is also proposing a variety of landscape modifications, including trellises and shrubs. You will recall that landscaping is under the purview of the board for commercial properties. The roof is proposed to match the existing building. The applicant has provided proposed character renderings. As mentioned in the staff report, should there be support for this application and should it move forward, the applicant would work with the city to purchase a portion of the property located to the north. The applicant can provide more detail on that, although preliminary conversations have occurred between the applicant and City Council regarding the sale of land. Staff has identified the following discussion questions for this evening. Does the board support the location of the proposed addition? Does the board support the mass and scale of the addition? And does the board support the proposed character, including building materials and landscaping? With that, I would be happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, the applicant is here as well tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Barnum, do you have any remarks?
Sure. The main reason that I'm proposing, I'm trying to do this development is we're a very wine-centric restaurant. And currently we do have an existing wine cellar in the restaurant that's extremely small. So what ends up happening is now in the garage area of the restaurant, I've got coolers back there. There's cases of wine scattered all over the place. It's not good for storage. It's not good to keep the wine and not in a temperature controlled environment. So I'd like to be able to add this expansion on to the existing wine cellar for several reasons. One, it's going to increase my capacity by, I think we'll probably have could have as many as maybe 20,000 bottles in this addition. And it's really going to be a feature. Now, the addition doesn't have any windows, obviously, to store the wine. We don't want any sunlight. It's got to be temperature controlled. And I'm going to make it very architecturally pleasing to the guest in that they'll be able to walk into this room and, look over the wine, pick out a bottle of wine. And so it's an addition that we've been talking about for a long time. The issue's been, it's been on city property. And I've already gone through that process where it has been approved by council, not officially, but they've already done an appraisal on this property. And that's why I wanted to come to the informal review just to see, you get the feedback before I actually, filed an actual, development there. So the idea was to come. I had the design collective do the drawings, but I'd like to get some feedback because to me, it doesn't matter what materials this addition is made out of, the color, anything. My main thing is to get the additional storage and create this feature in the restaurant that's really going to be a huge amenity for my customers. There's not, for those of you that dine out and maybe it's, special occasion restaurant, because Tucci's is a fine dining restaurant. I don't know how many restaurants in the city you can actually walk into their wine cellar and pick out a nice bottle of wine and make it part of your experience. So it's just much more than a storage unit from the inside. And I've been talking about this for 3, 4, 5 years, and now obviously it's time for me to make this this improvement.
Thank you. All right, so for the board, we have 3 questions to consider. The first one is, does the board support the location of the proposed addition? The property is located within historic Dublin and is zoned BSD/HC, Historic Core. The zoning district permits additions to existing buildings in compliance with code regulations and the guidelines. So any questions, conversation regarding the first question?
I maybe have just one question for Nikki. Maybe just once Mr. Barnum buys the land, there's not a setback or any other issue over there, right? He has that. It'll be compliant wherever it sits on that piece of property. It won't need a variance of something else once he buys the land.
My anticipation is that there may need to be a waiver. Until the land is purchased, we won't know where that property line falls.
Okay.
I think from a planning standpoint, our priority is to maintain that pedestrian connectivity. Mm-hmm. So as long as this addition doesn't impact that, we would hope that we would be able to work through that item. Okay.
And then one maybe for Mr. Barnum, will you need new HVAC or anything for the room, or you'll have be existing?
No, we will add a cooling unit. You've got to have that wine cellar around 55 degrees. We actually have a cooling unit in the existing room, but because of the capacity, we'll have to purchase another one.
Okay, and that'll be somewhere. I don't know where they are now, but it'll be somewhere where it'll be in the same place where you have your condensers, the air conditioners now, or it'll have to sit near the same spot.
That's a good question. I'm not exactly sure where that would fit. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, for me, I'm in support of the addition. I don't, when I look at it, I mean, normally you put these kind of additions in the back, but there's no room in the back. So I think from where it sits, it's good. And I think once you get into the more details where it sits again along that pedestrian walkway and the slope of the roof and all, I think it can work out. But for me, I don't see an issue with the proposed location. I mean, people are walking through there, having that there. I don't think detracts from anything from a pedestrian or a city standpoint.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, I'm fine with I'm absolutely fine with the location as long as we're not encroaching on the sidewalk there. As long as that path is still there, I'm fine.
Okay, Gary.
I agree. I'm fine with the location, massing, scale. May have something to say in one of the other points later, but otherwise I think it's fine. Yeah, very logical.
Okay, Brian.
Yep, all's been said. Sean mentioned mechanicals. You know, if those could be kept at least away from street view, or then hidden away or something. But you know, that would probably come later in your drawings too. How are you going to deal with that? That's it.
Yep, I echo all of the above. All right.
Great.
So question number 2 is, does the board support the proposed mass and scale of the addition?
Yes.
Yes, have no problems.
Yes.
Great.
Okay. And the third question is, does the board support the proposed character, including the conceptual building materials and landscaping?
Actually, that was my only comment, was the landscaping. Obviously, we're going to have to take out you've got a few bushes there now. You're going to take them out. So when you come back, I'd like to see what the final landscaping plan is and how you're going to screen them. Any additional mechanicals you have to add. Actually, right now, there's a gigantic electric box that's not screened at all, that's sitting back there and very noticeable. It'd be great if, as part of this, we could somehow screen that a little bit. Make it not quite as noticeable.
Yeah. Yeah. And just so you're clear, that landscaping, this is all on city property. So all the existing landscape down there now is maintained by the city. So I don't mind. Yeah. I mean, I'll plant whatever I can. Obviously, we get a lot of traffic and pedestrian traffic down this sidewalk. So it's obviously in my best interest to make sure it looks great. And I'll tell you, we've spent a lot of money with flowers and landscape and so forth, even the last couple of years. And the city's been actually really good to work with as far as doing a partnership down there. So I'm going to make sure the landscape looks fantastic. But again, that landscape I'm planning will be on city property.
Okay. All right.
I would, I don't even see the need for the trellis. I worry a little bit about how you maintain the painted surface behind if you do have mature plantings on the trellis and then you need to get in there and paint. You try to unscrew and take the trellis off, or you take half your plantings out.
No, and that was the architect inserted that. I would rather not have it there. So if the board is in unison with that, I can put those trees and bushes in front of it, which is fine. The trellis doesn't have to exist.
Yeah, I mean, just two more arborvitae or linear, vertical trees would be fine. I don't think you need the trellis.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think you need it. Actually, my biggest concern is if you could somehow screen the electrical box that's there and what else you might be adding.
Right. So if you look at the end of the building there, going to the west, there are quite a few city mechanicals. So you gotta see that one. There's just one picture of that, but there's a couple of huge boxes back there.
Yeah.
And I think the city does have a tree and a couple of bushes that try to screen it, but then beyond that, almost on the street, there's huge boxes that are city utilities. So I mean, I don't mind helping with that. I mean, I guess my plan was to work with the city in doing a partnership down there and kind of going down there to make sure that when this goes in, that we partner with this and try to figure out how do we screen all this. Because again, we get a lot of pedestrians that walk down here. You can notice too that the city has those post lights in there, and that doesn't get affected by this. Those are really, they're lit at night, obviously, and those are a nice feature down there, and the building sits back away from those post lights.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from the board?
No, I was just gonna say, actually, the landscaping, it's almost like you want the landscaping to disappear on that walkway. It wouldn't be a focal point you want to draw attention to, because I think if you draw attention to it, you would just notice more mechanicals and things that it's trying to hide. So, any low maintenance kind of landscaping is something I would lean towards.
Okay.
All right, that's it.
Okay, so I'm back for a formal review next time. I appreciate the comments. Anything else? And I'll add this, and I know Jenny's on here. The city has been absolutely incredible to work with through COVID. Fantastic, and our business at Tucci's has been fantastic through this whole COVID experience. I've been one of the lucky ones. I own other restaurants, Matt the Millers, that haven't been so lucky. Not that we're doing poorly, but nowhere near where we were last year. Tucci's has been a rare restaurant that we've actually done. Believe it or not, we're doing now better than we did 2019, and we had a record in 2019 in sales.
Oh my gosh!
I tell people if I had 10 of these restaurants, I'd be sitting on a beach right now somewhere. But I've got one of them, and it's I think a combination. We've been there for 22 years. It's an A+ location now that the infrastructure's down there. Again, thanks to the city to put that parking garage down there. And we've done great business down there. We've seen a lot of the Dublin residents. We've spent a lot of money on landscaping, and we're trying to make improvements. I mean, we're not sitting back holding on. We're trying to move this business in a positive direction. And again, with Jenny and Dana McDaniel, it's just been absolutely tremendously fantastic to work with and helping businesses out down there. So I'm a pretty happy camper in historic Dublin. So thank you.
Well, we're glad you're there.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Good.
We're good. All right. We'll go to the next case. The next case is Gardenia Market. Let everybody get ready. Okay. All right. Great. All right. This is Gardenia Market at 16 to 22 North High Street. It's a minor project review. The application is a request for the approval of the installation of a lattice fence and overhead lighting for an existing tenant space zoned Bridge Street District Historic Core. The site is northeast of the intersection of North High Street with West Bridge Street. Zach, your presenter, and he's all ready.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening. This is an application for review and approval of a minor project for the property of 16 and 22 North High Street. 16 and 22 North High Street are located on the same parcel, as they are highlighted both in yellow on the screen. The site is located within the Historic Core zoning district. This property was before the Planning and Zoning Commission back in September of 2019. The applicant did receive approval for multiple site modifications. As you can see the site plan to the right of the text here. These improvements included roof replacements, window and door replacements, patio and alley improvements, additional lighting in the alley, as well as new exterior paint. Many of these items have been accomplished on the site as they were included as part of the facade program that the city, the Economic Development Department had put on for the historic district. However, this grant has been suspended due to complications of COVID. And the approval has expired. So any items that have not taken place yet, any improvements that have not taken place yet, would need to come back to the board for further approval. Earlier in 2020, staff has been working with the applicant regarding items of non-compliance on the site. This includes the contents of this application today, which include the lattice fence and the colored string lighting in the alley. Shown on the screen are existing conditions of the site at 16 and 22. Shown on the screen is the existing lattice fence that is requesting approval today. This fence sits along the southern border of the site, and it is in line with the 16 North High Street building. It's in line with the south edge of that building, as you can see on that left photo. So the applicant is requesting approval of an existing lattice fence and existing string lights. There is a legend on the right that can lead you to where these items are located on the site. The string lights are shown in yellow in the alley between 16 and 22 North High Street. These string lights are identical in design to the alley lighting that was proposed back in September of 2019. However, the sole difference between these two is that the lights can be controlled for whatever color the applicant may choose to pursue, so they are changeable color lights. And the applicant is also requesting approval of an existing 6-foot tall lattice fence. This lattice fence is made of 4-foot by 8-foot long wooden lattice panels that are connected to 4-inch by 4-inch wooden posts. This fence does sit 6 feet in height. However, there is an approximately 2-foot gap below the lattice panels. And this is set back approximately 3 feet from the southern property line, which does meet the setback requirements for this building type. The Historic Dublin Design Guidelines do speak specifically to fences within the historic district. It does state that fences are appropriate for the district as long as they are done in designs and materials appropriate for the district. The guidelines also state that any wooden fence shall always use paint or opaque stain for wood, rather than leaving it natural. In terms of materials and design, lattice fences are not specified within the text of the historic district. So typically it does recommend traditional fencing. However, there are exceptions should the board find them appropriate. Based on the Dublin Design Guidelines, staff has come up with has directed a few conditions towards the applicant would pursue painting or staining the fence. The second would be that the applicant have a similar finish on both the north and south elevations of the lattice fence, so there's consistent design on both sides of the fence, and that the applicant would finish the bottom of the fence with a 2x4 wood pole or wood post, similar to how it is finished on top of the fence. Planning staff has reviewed all applicable criteria to this application and are recommending 4 conditions with this application. I'm happy to answer any questions that the commission or the board may have. The applicant is also here and willing to answer any questions you may have as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. Does the applicant have any remarks?
Thank you, Zach, and thank you, everybody, for this meeting. Now, we have no comments in addition to that. I guess we're happy to comply with all the staff's requirements. The only thing I guess we did dispute was the staining of the fence. And I guess I didn't hear if you said, Zach, that's a code requirement or not, but it sounded, when we were discussing on the phone, it was more of a personal matter of taste, and we kind of like the unfinished look personally. So other than that, and plus it is a cost. Yeah, I know cost should not be a consideration generally with these type of things, but obviously as a restaurant right now, it's struggling, as you can imagine, like people from Tucci's are talking about. So we're trying to minimize cost. But the other criteria with the 2x4 at the bottom, things like that, I think that's certainly, and to make the fence match on both sides, we talked about that, and that's all okay. And the lighting issue, again, I'm not sure if there's an issue there or not. They look exactly like we submitted last year, but they are adjustable with remote control, different colors based on the event, the holiday, the theme of the night, things like that.
If I may, very quickly, in terms of that, the stain and paint, it's not a requirement of the district. The design guidelines are simply guidelines to guide staff and the board in terms of potential directions. It's up to the board themselves whether they agree with that recommendation or not. So that's certainly up for discussion. I just wanted to make that point clear.
Okay, thank you.
And it said before the board makes a recommendation, I want them to.
I have a question. Can I ask a question for? So, a clarification actually. So, a fence was approved, but not this fence, or because I thought the way I read it was that there was a condition that a fence had to be metal or cedar. That's what I read in the report.
So
was there a fence approved at one time, or this just went up without approval?
So with the September 2019 proposal, the applicant, they did request lattice. It wasn't in this location. It was more as a decorative feature around the courtyard patio that they were proposing. However, those improvements have not been made due to, and I'll leave Eric and Marvick to speak to that. However, the location, what we're considering today was not included with that proposal, and it did go up in, I don't know, I don't recall when it went up. Eric, you may be able to speak further to that, but this was something we've been working on them towards compliance, hence why we are here today, so that they may receive approval of
So
that.
it was not approved.
Correct.
It was not approved.
Was somewhere else on the site. They had considered putting some type of thing. So the condition of metal or cedar, that has nothing to do with what this was, or
correct. That that was September of last year. This has nothing to do with. This is a separate approval. It's no extension of the original approval.
So let's be real clear. This was put up without permission, without coming before us, and the lattice was approved for something very different than what this turns out to be. Just so we're clear.
Okay.
And I will just take issue with you, Zach, about the guidelines only being suggestions. I think they have a little bit more than that. So we use that.
There's a practical reason to stain or paint it because it will last longer. If you leave this lattice out, it's going to look horrible in 2 years. It's not going to look good. But if it's stained or treated, it might last a little longer.
Yeah, actually, treated lumber is meant to rest. That's not the right word, but meant to not be stained or painted for a certain amount of time.
Right,
6 months to a year generally.
But then it starts to brown and stain, and it needs to be painted.
I have a question. I thought I wrote that the lights were colored and twinkling. Is that true?
No, exactly. We have the ability to make it twinkling or change any color. It's a remote control. So it could be yellow, just like the one we submit. It could be red, blue, any color, or it can change color like a Christmas light going in different colors. But they're exactly the same as the one we submit. But
I thought the one that was submitted was white.
It didn't say that it was white. It just showed exactly the same type of bulbs and lights that we have right now. It didn't mention any type of colors of lights.
Okay, so we did not approve or disapprove colored lights.
Exactly. It was approved to have the lights there exactly as, the...
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Do we have any public comment? Well, yes, we do. We have one public comment on this, on the fence.
Yes, we do. And I will be happy to read that for you.
Thank you.
So we do have one public comment. It's from Michael Maloof at 6308 Weiler Court, Dublin, Ohio, 43016. He says, I would like to ask that they complete the fence all the way to the intersect with my building at 16 East Bridge Street. The activities they have going on have created issues and complaints from the tenants that people are parking on our property and walking to the rear of this property. They also cut across the property to get to the back instead of walking around to the front or rear of their building. They have all complained that the restaurant has been using the dumpster. I think if they continued the fence to close off the property, it would help.
That's perfect.
Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, so board discussion.
Can we respond to that comment?
You may, yes. Mhm.
The owner of that property allowed us to use his dumpster. We had a friendly
Yes.
agreement initially. We had an issue with the food truck, which you'll notice has been removed. There's been a lot of discussion about that. That's been removed, and that was the cause of most of the problems.
But also what I believe his biggest complaint is because then we close our alley and his pizza driver and his pizza customer wasn't able to drive by our property as they were used to do, park their car there while they were getting the pizza. Once that we close our alley, that is stopped. And even one time someone, I don't know if it was him, called the police to complain because I closed my own alley. The police called me and they said, that's my property. And that's not a public street. I had asked these guys, the pizza drivers from Domino and the pizza drivers or clients from him, to stop driving to my property and parking there to get their pizzas. And I even had to make a letter to Domino's guy because it was not only the driving by and parking their cars, they also park the cars there with friends on their breaks to hang out in my parking lot. And most of the time, I'm having these guys from mostly Domino's Pizza coming to the alley in between the two buildings to smoke pot. They're smoking pot like crazy in my property. Then, the only thing that I can do, I think this fence is going to be a good solution. And then the pizza guy comes to the city to complain. I can see this, but it's not exactly the entire truth.
Thank you. Thank you. What do they say? Good big fences make good. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Board discussion. Who would like to start? Thank you,
I
Amy.
don't think the fence is appropriate. I don't know that anywhere in downtown Dublin we would approve a lattice fence.
Are you saying specifically the lattice or any fence?
The lattice.
Okay.
The existing fence is not appropriate for, it's possible that they could bring something else with some vegetative screening or something to enclose if they're trying to use this as a dining area, but a lattice fence, no, I just don't see it.
Okay, thank you.
I agree with Amy. She's right. I give staff a lot of credit for trying to find some sort of compromise here, but yeah, we would never approve. I mean, there's so many reasons why, in terms of appearance, appropriateness, even how well it'll function. And I know cost. You can buy sheets of lattice. It's easy to use, but it's just going to look like it's not going to reflect well on this business and these owners, and nor will it reflect well on us in the community. And I think Amy's right. Unfortunately, I'd like to provide some help. Maybe there are other fencing options that are not quite as. Maybe there's something lower scale that could actually be extended further. That's still an impediment to get over, but not as flimsy as this.
We've approved wrought iron, like metal fences in the historic district. We have approved fences. It's not that we're against fences. It's just there's nothing. There's no lattice fence anywhere.
Sean?
I think it's going to fall apart, right? That's lattice fences tend to, after a very short period of time, they're just not built very sturdily. So I think at the end, if somebody's over there behind the dumpster and somebody leans against it or whatever happens, it's going to break. So, I don't know about the background of lattice fences, but generally they're just not very stable or sturdy, and they, a little water between each of the lattices and they start to warp and rot. So I agree with Karen, just trying to think about a way that it doesn't cost something a lot to make it different, but lattice is is really more decorative than it is to do something like this.
Thank you. Frank?
Yeah, I mean, everybody just said everything. I feel for the owners because yes, you're dealing with a good cost, and no fence is cheap. And the minute it gets more sturdy, it's when the prices go up. But the other side is you are in a historic district, and to be in a historic district comes with its positives and negatives. And negatives can be costs will go up and have to deal with things like a fence. But yeah, the lattice fence, I can't think of how that would fit historically appropriate really in almost in any historic kind of neighborhood, not even just Dublin. So I think everyone else has said everything else I would agree with.
And I'm in the same place. I saw it and it's like kind of my heart stopped. It just doesn't work in the historic district. I totally understand and I'm very sympathetic with you about the economics of this, but this fence, we would never have approved it. It doesn't belong in historic Dublin.
Have you noticed that the fence is not in any place that is in front of the facade of the buildings from the historic? It's totally behind dumpsters and it's exactly in the backyard of our property. It's not for the public to see.
It's in the historic district.
And it's made out of wood, which is pretty much part of the historic materials, right?
No.
Like the wooden boards on the sidewalks that you guys like so much.
Well, like we mentioned, the fence was built for a purpose. The purpose is we've got neighbors that have delivery drivers that aren't very respectful, that are smoking pot and coming on our property. We have delivery trucks and people pick up pizzas all times of the day and night, shining headlights over there. Yeah. So we were trying to create a simple screen, and unfortunately, a wrought iron fence doesn't do that, doesn't solve that purpose. So we're open to suggestions, but we've got a problem to deal with between our two properties, our three properties. Mm-hmm. So we're open to suggestions on what that might be, because we have a problem there that I don't know what else to fix without a fence. And here we have one neighbor saying they want the fence extended.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I don't think
landscaping is a possibility. You could do some type of landscaping screen to, shrubbery, various. It's just this material is not where I'm not opposed to a fence here. I understand the practicality of why you want a fence. It's just not this fence.
Yes. So I think, Zach, can you come back on? I think you'll need to work with Zach. We all agree there's very good reasons for a fence, just not the lattice. So we are going to disapprove this. And the current fence will need to come down. And Zach, if you could work with them on something that would be more appropriate than the current fence.
Absolutely.
This is terrible.
So I need a motion. So I'm going to ask for a motion to approve the current with the 4 conditions. So that's the way we're going to vote rather than doing it as a negative. So I need a motion to approve the minor project with 4 conditions.
So I'll move to approve the minor project with the 4 conditions.
I can second it.
Okay. So Judy, we now need a vote.
Mr. Kaneki?
I believe I have this correct, that we were voting yes, we want to remove the fence. I'm a little lost.
No.
So,
are we voting for a negative? Is a positive?
No, we're voting to approve the fence with the condition. So we're voting yes would approve, yes would approve, and a no would not approve.
So in this instance, I would vote no.
Ms. Cram?
No.
Mr. Cotter?
No.
Mr. Alexander?
No.
Ms. Bryan?
No. I'm very sorry. I wish you would come to us before you'd put the fence up. Okay. We'll move on to the next. All right, so the last case that we have is if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Bergwall. Is that Bergwall Residence at 181 South High Street? This is an informal review. The application is a request for feedback on a proposed addition and exterior modification for an existing single-family home on a 0.47 acre site zoned Bridge Street District Historic Residential. The site is northwest of the intersection of South High Street with Waterford Drive. Ms. Martin will be our presenter.
Great, thank you. As mentioned, this is a request for review and informal feedback for a proposal at 181 South High Street. The site is located northwest of the intersection with South High Street and Waterford Drive. This site is zoned Bridge Street District Historic Residential and is 0.47 acres in size. You will notice here the parcel was originally platted as part of historic Dublin, whereas Waterford Drive was platted with the development of the Waterford neighborhood to the west. These are the existing conditions of the site. Access is presently provided via Waterford Drive, and the site has approximately 100 feet of frontage along South High Street with a historic stone wall and 2 mature front yard trees. This home is an example of a raised ranch style home built in 1967. You'll notice here the masonry facade. This is the proposed site plan. The applicant is requesting feedback on a number of building additions as well as exterior modifications tonight. You'll notice the site layout remains generally the same, with the footprint of the main home in the existing location as well as the vehicular access. Finally, there is an existing detached shed located in the southwest portion of this, which is proposed to be retained. The new additions to the site plan include a revised front porch, as well as a large at-grade patio, family room addition, and a new garage addition. The applicant is seeking feedback on the location of the proposed garage. The location of the proposed garage is similar to the existing garage, although it is located approximately 6 feet to the west. That being said, with the 2 front yard setbacks, one along South High Street and one along Waterford Drive, the proposed garage and the existing garage do encroach into a required setback. Therefore, the applicant is seeking feedback if they were to demolish that existing garage. Would the board be supportive of an encroachment into that required setback? So the applicant has provided a number of proposed elevations. It is important to note that this property, as it was built in 1967, was evaluated as part of the city's historic and cultural assessment. At the time of the evaluation, the property was not yet 50 years old. Our historic preservation consultant has noted that this is a good example of a mid-century raised ranch. The applicant is proposing to modify the raised ranch by creating a more dominant core. That is achieved by demolishing the garage to the south and moving it west to establish a more prominent front porch. You'll notice here a flat roof front porch supported by 6 columns and a double door central entry. Additionally, there are floor to ceiling Gothic style windows. The first story of the home is clad in a vertical, what appears to be board and batten siding finished in white. The upper stories of the home are painted brick, which is painted white. Additionally, you'll see those roofline accents, which are both finished in board and batten siding. This is the north property line, or the side property line, most interior to the site. The principal structure remains largely the same. All of the existing brick is proposed to be painted white. The T form is slightly modified to maintain a side gable, and the living room addition and enclosed screen porch is visible on the right-hand side of the screen. A new chimney is proposed, which is located at the intersection of the screened-in porch and living room. This is the south elevation visible from Waterford Drive. You'll notice the existing portions of the home are proposed to be painted brick. The additions here are proposed to be the vertical board and batten siding. The applicant is modifying the roof line of the proposed garage. Today, the attached garage and existing garage have a roof line that match one another. It's unclear as to whether or not this roof line modification and shed dormer is intended to provide additional usable space or is purely decorative. The applicant is proposing that living room addition to the west. However, that being said, the perception of the south elevation from Waterford Drive will remain largely the same as the existing shed, which is not shown in this elevation, and the proposed attached garage will be the dominant features along Waterford Drive, as are today. This is the proposed west elevation, which faces the rear property line in the Waterford Village subdivision. There is an existing vegetative buffer between this property and Waterford Village. You'll notice here the upper story of the home is proposed to be painted white, and the lower story of the home is proposed to be clad in the vertical board and batten siding. There are two entrances, one on the north side, which provides access to the screened-in porch, and one to the south, which provides access to the primary residence. The modified garage addition does include 2 garage bays instead of 1, but maintains the same rear-loaded form. The discussion questions, which were outlined in your staff report, have been modified this evening just to provide some additional clarity that the applicant was looking for. The first discussion question is, does the board support the conceptual farmhouse character? The second question is, does the board support the proposed garage demolition and potential waiver for the location of a new garage? Does the board support the proposed mass and scale of the additions? And then finally, does the board support the exterior modifications, including materials and architectural details? With that, I would be happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, our applicant and the applicant's representative are here as well tonight.
Hi, welcome. Ms. Bergwall, do you have anything you want to add? Or Rich, welcome back. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
Thank you. Just very quickly wanted to thank you all for adding us to your very busy schedule tonight. Really appreciate it. Really, really excited to finally get started on this project. We purchased the home over 4 years ago. We've been in Dublin for 18 years, knew we wanted to be in downtown. And this one came up sooner than we were really ready to move downtown because we have kids, one child that's still in high school at Jerome, but we loved the lot, just absolutely fell in love with the lot, the view of the barn, the corner lot. And so we quickly scooped up the house and have been renting it out, and now are really, really excited to get started. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening again. I wanted to thank all of you for giving us an opportunity to present this project in an informal format. As Ms. Bryant said at the beginning of the meeting, these are really helpful to both sides of the board and to us to kind of get these things formulated before we get too far into it. I assume you've all read our applicant statement. I'd like to add a couple more comments to that and talk a little bit about where we are in the process. So obviously this is a preliminary design, and our major goal at this point is to see how all of the pieces might fit fit together to satisfy Tim and Debbie's requirements, as well as the requirements of the board. We haven't resolved every issue with the exterior, and we're going to continue working on that. For example, the way that the new family room connects with the existing gabled roof at the back still needs work, and the garage roof and the dormer haven't been finalized. But to keep the design process from getting too far out of sequence, we decided not to spend any more time on those elements until we had the board's feedback and we had some preliminary cost projections, which we're hoping to have soon. We know we're making significant changes to the exterior of this home, but we think those changes are appropriate and are a significant improvement. The massing of the existing home is pretty simple, but it's marred by some poorly designed elements that we are correcting with this renovation. One of those changes is the way that the existing garage attaches to the house. In traditional home design, it's almost always desirable to clearly separate the major masses. In this case, the main two-story block and the subordinate attached garage. Wrapping the garage around the front and obliterating a corner of the main masses, as the case here, is typically a traditional design no-no. That's why we're proposing to demolish the existing garage and put a new, appropriately separated garage mass in its place. The pitch of the new garage roof is steeper than the main house, but we think that is a minor deviation, and that's more than offset by the proper location and massing of the new garage. Removing the garage, however, emphasizes the asymmetry of the east facade because the office bump out remains and the front door and the upper windows are off center with the main box. So the next major move that we're making here is to match the bump out on the left with the bump out on the right, and then tie both together with a full-length front porch. And we move the front door back to the center and the upper floor windows back to the center, and that completes the symmetrical composition of the east elevation. We also recognize that painting brick is not always preferred, but in this case, we think it's necessary for a couple reasons. First, some of the existing brick and mortar is deteriorated, and it's always very difficult to match that back up again with new brick and mortar. Second, by the time we move windows around, patch in around doors, take additions off, move roofs and all that, we're going to expose brick that's been behind other elements since 1967 and will never match the new brick. So it's, we get two instances where new brick or old brick that hasn't been exposed is not going to match up with the weathered brick. And in my opinion, at least, a poor match is worse than painting it. So I do disagree with the consultant's report regarding the significance of the raised ranch typology of this house. I realize that the home's age qualifies it as historic, but age alone doesn't mean a home contributes positively to the architectural character of the surroundings. In fact, I'd argue the opposite, that the design of the current house detracts significantly from the desirable character of the historic district, and that the changes that we're proposing add to the district's character in a very positive way. I think that's especially important in this location. It's kind of a city gateway to the historic district and very visible from that city park directly to the south where the barn is. Again, thank you. We're excited about this project and eager to hear your thoughts.
Thank you. Okay, so any questions from the board for the applicants?
I have one question. Oh, I'm sorry, Amy, go ahead.
Go ahead. You can ask the question. I'll go next.
What was the shed? What's going to happen to the shed? That's an important part of the composition.
It just gets painted and that's it.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, Amy.
Okay. So I don't have a question, but I have a very important comment that affects the rest of the discussion. So is it okay to?
Sure.
Say that now? Okay. And it's in regards to the consultant's report. And I think it makes a huge difference what that report or how we take that report. And as an architectural historian who's been doing it for 23 years now, I have never in my life in Ohio run across someone calling something a raised ranch. I think it's kind of a colloquial term, maybe some other states might use. It, in a sense, means like a 1.5 story. It's a split level. In Ohio, we call it a split level, or it could be a bi-level, which is a variant of a split level. But never have I encountered that term. I even was so baffled by that term that I contacted two colleagues, one who's been in the business for 40 years and who's the head of the state preservation office for determining building types. She's never heard of it. The other is who's written a document called Modern Ohio, which documents buildings from 1940 to 1970 and determines their styles and their significance. Again, she's heard of it, but says no one has ever used it, and it's a split level. So based on that, the consultant's calling it a building type that it's not. It is a two-story. It's a contemporary two-story house. That's it. And I disagree. It is not eligible for the National Register. It does not contribute to the district. It is correct that it was not evaluated in 2017 because it was right at the 50-year limit. It is now 50 years old, which means you can evaluate it for the National Register. The consultant is comparing it to two ranches, which are clearly ranches on Riverview. I believe they said, yeah, on Riverview. The reason the consultant report from 2017 said that mid-century modern, some of like the stuff, we all know where mid-century modern stuff is. Those are eligible or could be part of the district. This is not mid-century modern. This is not part of our mid-century modern districts. This is not on Franklin Street. This is not on Marion Street or Longview. So it is not. It's not mid-century modern. It's not a ranch. This is a two-story house, the first one in the development of Waterford, which is a late 1970s contemporary development. It does not contribute to either our historic core or even if we did expand it as mid-century modern. So I think that is extremely relevant because if this building is not a contributing building and it is not eligible for the National Register, then what can be done to it, because if you read the way the consultant wrote the report, they suggested that the building should remain as is because it's contributing, greatly impacts what the applicant can do to the house. So in my professional opinion as an architectural historian, again, I've done this for 23 years, and I, on a daily basis, determine if buildings are eligible for the National Register. This building is not. So in my opinion, those restrictions do not apply. So I would just, and I recommend disregarding the consultant report 100%. Just throw it out. It is not correct in my professional opinion.
Thank you. Amy, the whole issue of contributing and non-contributing is something I've been talking with staff about that we need some clarity around, because I think that term is being misused and it's very confusing. So I take your point on that, the whole contributing, non-contributing. So that's probably going to be the discussion that we'll have at another time, but I hear you on that.
It just, if you read the way the consultant wrote the report and her recommendations as to what can and can't be done changing this building, it makes a difference.
Sure.
So,
Nikki?
Yeah, same for me. Just because for me, I think it's Amy, that hinges on what you can do, right? That's the main crux to the whole thing. Because certainly, if you go one way, what they're asking to do looks like very difficult.
I think there's another way you can evaluate, because I had the same concerns Amy had, and I have books on architectural history here, and I've never seen that style. And so, and I thought, now I'm older and maybe things change. I finished school a long time ago. Maybe things change. So, but you can look at standards that we've used for changing structures as precedent. So what have we allowed people to do, and what have we not allowed people to do? And so I think in one sense, yeah, I questioned her categorization of that, but I also said, then how do you deal? What is an appropriate way to treat an existing structure in a historic district? And so,
right. Exactly. The difference being is she's recommending, hey, this is contributing. You should leave the existing structure as is, and you need to make a historic addition. Well, a historic addition would be a 1967 addition, first of all. It wouldn't look like something from 1850. So I just want to make sure people realize that, in my opinion, we need to look at this of, are these good changes, and throw out what she said regarding what they can and can't do.
I do think she had some valid points in there, so I don't know that I would throw the entire report out. I do agree with you on the whole raised ranch thing was like caught me off guard.
But I just wanted, before we got to the questions, I just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay, so we're still in. Any of the board members have any other questions for the applicants?
Actually, I just had one kind of question Amy sort of addressed also is, this is a split level. I mean, everybody knows it and calls it that. But, are we voting on the idea of changing the split level? Because what they're proposing, which I'm not against at all, I'm not saying that, is completely changing the dynamic of this house. I mean, it is no longer what it is today. It's for almost all essential purposes. You're making a whole new definition of style for this building.
Actually, it's not a split level. It's clear. It's a standard two.
It's a two-story.
It's two-story. Yeah.
It is standard two-story. Even that. I mean, we're still changing it all from this, late '60s design, very end of mid-century, to something completely and utterly different. Which I'm not saying I'm against it all. I'm saying, but does that fall under?
And I guess that was my point. My point being is, to me, it's not contributing. So it is acceptable to completely change it if we agree with the way they're completely changing it.
That's the key.
That was my question. Yeah.
So if we don't agree with the way they're completely changing it, that's a whole nother concept. But it shouldn't be because they're saying this is contributing or it's historic, because it's not.
Right.
This is a 1967 two-story building. And so we have to approve whether these changes are appropriate for that.
Right. Any other questions before we go to public comment? Okay.
That part of the discussion, by the way, caught me off guard.
Oh.
Yeah. I was going to say I grew up in a split level, so, I have firsthand knowledge.
Yeah. Are there any public comments?
There are no public comments.
Thank you. All right, so we have some questions to go over. And I think it'll get to the heart of some of what we've been talking about. So the first question is, does the board support the conceptual farmhouse character? So the concern here, and this is where I do agree with the consultant, is that the farmhouse style, although popular, may contribute to a false historicism, as historic farmhouse is located on 167 South High, and the historic Carrer Barn is located immediately to the south. The ARB code notes in section 153.174C4, all building structures and sites shall be recognized as products of their own time. Alterations that have no historical basis and which seek to create an earlier appearance inconsistent or inappropriate to the original integrity of the building shall be discouraged. So that is the question, is do we support this concept of the farmhouse? Who would like to start?
Kind of with that, it's sort of like, do we support the idea of completely changing the idea of what was originally built there? I think that's kind of the underlying question.
Well, it's actually two questions. It's that, and if the answer to that is yes, then do we support the farmhouse, which it isn't.
Yeah. So I kind of like to hear your debate, actually, Kathy, and so on, about what you think about, the idea of completely changing, call it the style of the existing structure.
I'll tell you my opinion. Since nobody else will speak up, I think you might as well tear it down if you're going to do this, because it has so little it does not have a good relationship to a farmhouse. Farmhouses are not thick and deep like the original mass of this house. They don't have pitches like the mass of this house. So the original volume of this house is never going to look like a farmhouse. And what I think would be a better comparison is if we had elevation drawings and you could see every window location on that existing front of the house and the forced symmetry to create this center hall. I mean, that's part of the rationalization for painting a brick is because you're moving so many openings around that you are going to have so many new places and patch and repair that because the changes are so dramatic, I think one, changing the house to this extent, we have never approved or allowed anybody to do this. And the farmhouse, it is just really forced. And the analogy that well, there's a barn across the street, so let's make it a farmhouse. Well, there's a fire station down the road. Why don't we make it look like a fire station? I mean, to me, it's just not logical, and it doesn't fit the house very well. I have no problem with extending a front porch. In fact, a lot of these houses, that garage is slipped forward and that roof continues across the front and becomes a porch. So I don't have, but I think my own feeling is you need to see, there needs to be a trace. And if there was a stronger relationship to what's left, to what's there, I might even buy removing the garage. But there's such a weak relationship to what's there, to what's created, that my feeling is, and I have a feeling, I do this for a living, when the prices come back, you may question doing this and you may question just tearing it down. So I cannot support the imposition of the farmhouse look on this in the manner it's been done right now.
Thank you, Gary.
I'll go. So my first thought when I saw this was to keep it, if you were going to change the style of it, to go more on the colonial revival end of it, because that's the right massing. They're very rectangular in form, and the form and mass of the existing house could be converted to colonial fairly easily with the porch across the front. My problem with changing it is if we change the front and side, we have to change all of it. Because what I don't want is to leave the north elevation and leave those windows and the dimensions of those windows are completely different than all the other new windows and dimensions we're putting in. So it's kind of, to me, it's like you just do it all. You make sure all the window openings match, and you change this whole entire house, or you try to change as little as possible and then put your addition on the back. I'm totally fine with the addition on the back. So to me, it can't look, you can't just change the front. You again have to change, you're gonna have the north and south windows are gonna have to be changed to match. But I think it can be done. But maybe, yeah, not the farmhouse, maybe, because I think the massing was off. There might be another, but my first thought was colonial revival has that type of massing.
Thank you, Amy.
For me, I mean, I trust Amy and Gary a bit on the farmhouse versus colonial. But for me, just looking at the standard and what we're trying to apply, just doing a fundamental, complete shift of what it is to something completely different doesn't feel in the spirit of what the guidelines talk about, right? So just making a wholesale change just because you can do it, it doesn't fit the spirit, whether it should be colonial or something else. Mm-hmm. For me, it just doesn't feel right with what the spirit of the code is trying to do. So if you're saying maybe Amy, go to colonial and do it something with that you can make it fit in that what its character could be, even though in 1967 it wasn't.
Well, there's
sounds
the
better.
Colonial, yeah, the colonial, right? I mean, it has essence of a colonial.
Yeah.
If you had to find something that was style-wise, I mean, it's vernacular. But if you had to pull for straws, that's about the closest I could find would be essence of colonial revival.
Because for me, I mean, going one way or the other, fundamentally, it just doesn't fit inside what the code and the guidelines are asking us to make sure that we do. So I have it's more about how, if we start to say we're gonna change things to something else, for me, it doesn't feel, it's just not the right thing. Whether it needs to be farmhouse or whether it's colonial, I think is a bit of, as I can say, what it's going to be. But having a fundamental change just doesn't feel right, because that's what the code is asking us not to do.
Right. Gary, did you have something you wanted to say?
Well,
oh, you just put yourself on mute.
You know, and this is kind of, you know, when I read this report and then I read the other report, both reports our consultant talks about, and this is kind of an open discussion, but maybe, and this is something for Rich and his client. You know, they say no false historicism. What I'm kind of, I wish someone in the district would say, these homes, there's a certain tradition that's actually very popular now. Things that are tuned more to mid-century modern. And the architects who've done our commercial work are not afraid to begin to move things into a slightly more non-traditional appearance. So the little office building that's behind the structure on High Street, the one that's being built behind, down there, it's the one behind the Brazen Head. That one may be going a little further than a lot of residential clients would like. But those are ways, and so if we were looking for a fit of something that could work with the house, and I think you could, you know, flat roof front porch might be fine on this. And bringing it across the front might be fine, and it may be able to make work with more of the existing house. So I think you can do a big. What I thought was positive about this is this makes the point. You can do an addition that has a large footprint, but the original mass of the house is not overwhelmed. The original mass of this house still reads with all the square footage in the back and around. So I think you could still do a substantial addition. It could be tweaked a little more towards the house. And I'm just saying, if we're looking for a tradition that might pair the existing house better with contemporary living standards and aesthetic, I mean, there may be another direction to go. It's not so history.
Oh, I'm totally for making it contemporary. I think it's a 1967, you're past mid-century modern, it can totally be contemporary.
Okay. Frank, did you want me to go?
That's kind of what I was saying also to begin with, is that, you know, what we're doing to this building is completely redefining it. So, you know, you can try to fake it out as a farmhouse or whatever you want to, or just go completely contemporary, modern, like Amy was just saying, which I think is actually maybe more correct. I mean, otherwise, are we trying to save I don't even know if mid-century would extend to 67. I know it basically ends at the very early 60s sometime. Are we trying to save that style? Because if we are, that's not doing it.
Yeah, in my opinion, we don't need to save the look of a two-story from 1967.
Right. So
it's nothing noteworthy.
Yeah,
make it look nice.
Yeah, that's kind of how I'm thinking about it too. It's like, if we're not trying to save 67, then you could do whatever you want, really, to some extent. At that end, at the new end of us.
So I walk by this house all the time and have thought that it needed some love. So I'm glad to see that there's someone who's going to do that for it. So thank you for that. Having said that, I don't see the farmhouse character to be in. I just think it's too forced. I think there's a lot of other things you could do with that and enhance what you've got. But the farmhouse just is too contrived as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so the next question is, does the board support the proposed garage demolition and then the potential waiver waiver for the location of the new garage? The property, this whole non-contributing crap. Sorry.
See, if I had written that letter, I would say it's non-contributing. Don't worry about it.
Sorry, it's getting late. So
No
anyway.
7-second delay.
So I think it's, yeah, those comments aren't, I'm not going to read them. Okay, so it's basically, do we support the proposed demolition of the garage and potential waiver for the new location?
Rich, just maybe a quick question. The reason to take the garage out is really to make the line, to keep the lines of the house so that the porch, so that the massing and the porch looks more seamless inside of that. I mean, that's the fundamental reason that you would like to do that?
That's the fundamental one of two reasons. Yeah, it's to re-separate those masses properly.
Yeah.
And the second is it's a single garage door. It's not a particularly deep garage, and it just isn't suitable for modern cars.
Okay, so it's too small. So yeah. Okay.
Yeah. There you go. I could have just said that.
Yep.
He had to use architect speak.
Yeah. I try not to.
So how do we feel about potentially tearing down this current garage and providing a waiver for a new?
I think if the garage, if tearing it down and the new garage looks appropriate, I'm for that. I don't know that we should provide a waiver because we have a clean slate to work with. I missed why we needed the waiver.
Yeah, Nikki, can you tell us why we would need a waiver for that, for a new garage?
Yeah. So I'm going to pull up a plan really quickly, and we'll just talk from that.
It's not one of the two front yard setback weird things, is it? Because it's on a corner lot?
Yes. So to answer your question, Amy, it is.
Okay.
But it's also twofold, really, because, right, I had mentioned that this was platted as part of historic Dublin, and Waterford Drive was platted at a later date as part of the Waterford Village subdivision. And so the curvature of Waterford Drive and the lot lines for this lot do not coincide with one another. So if you look at the lot to the west, you can see how that property line follows Waterford Drive because it's part of the Waterford Drive subdivision. And this lot does not follow the street. So it really skinnies up the area that they have to work with. And then in addition to that, you have frontage on two rights of way.
Okay.
Got it.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you. Okay.
So I mean, I guess for me, and if we think about redoing the whole thing, then tearing the garage down may be right. Earlier, I was thinking maybe not, but now if we think about reimagining it, then for me, I could be supportive of that.
Yeah, I have, if it's appropriate to the new design of the house, I don't have a problem with it.
If I'm reading this correctly, the existing garage technically doesn't meet the line anyway, right? Is that right, Nikki?
That's correct.
Yeah, so they're already with the existing garage would technically need a waiver. Like, I mean, it's in the whatever the setback line was.
Yep. Yeah, I think you got that right. So I don't think any of us really have a problem with that. It sounds like.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Let me qualify. I want to qualify if enough of the existing house was visible and was being used and retained, then I would entertain removing the garage, because I think a new garage, and I would like to see any elevation, the shed drawn, because really those two structures, what I'm kind of surprised with is I think the best siting on this house is not on High Street, but the park. And those two structures frame the potential view out towards the park and the connection of the house and the living space with the green space beyond. And when you drive up on Waterford, you see the house relative to the end of the garage and that shed. So I think that's an important component, whether it's just painted, but it has a roof profile, and you're going to see that roof profile relative to everything else. And it's an important design component, and I don't think it can be ignored when you design the rest of this, because it's pretty big. It's pretty big. And so my response is somewhat qualified, depending on what the front and how much of the house is retained.
Okay, thank you, Gary. All right, so does that, Rich and Debbie, does that give you what you need on that question? Okay, so the third question is, does the board support the proposed mass and scale of the additions? The guidelines provide recommendations regarding the overall character, building scale and mass, and development patterns. Mass, form, and lot coverage should be similar to surrounding buildings, and additions should be subordinate to or distinct from the original structure. The guidelines identify because additions can have a significant impact upon the character and appearance of an existing building and upon the historic district, the design must be developed carefully. So those are the considerations for supporting or not the proposed mass and scale of the addition. Thoughts?
I think the mass and scale of the rear additions are completely appropriate. I think the deciding factor will be the garage and how that fits in, and like Gary said, the view from Waterford. I think that will be the key component. But the rear stuff, I'm completely fine with the mass and scale of those.
Okay.
Yep, I concur with Amy.
Gary?
I complimented him earlier. I think this is an example where you can have a large addition, but because it's not as tall as the house, and the way it's sided here primarily to the back and side, I think you can have a large addition and still make it subordinate to the volume of the house. So I'm fine with that.
Thank you. Sean?
Yeah, I'm okay. I mean, it's subordinate for me. When you're looking at just at the rendering, it's subordinate to the rest of the structure. Looks for me is okay. I'd be interested to see, depending on what they do, what the front porch looks like. So because it's just the way it sits on the lot, that's something you see, and just depending on how that fits in, where the garage shows up. Interesting to see how that fits in there.
Yeah. I agree. I think the addition, I mean, you've got some beautiful space back there. So I do warn you that we have seasonal skunks, so you might want to be aware of that.
We've already dealt with that with the renters. We've several times had to go out there and deal with that. So
yeah, they seem to like that area there.
They liked under the front porch quite a bit. So we've dealt with that a few times. But thank you.
But yeah, I think that the additions were fine. Okay, the last question for this discussion is, does the board support exterior alterations, including materials and architectural details? The guidelines and code provide guidance about exterior materials and details for new construction, additions, and existing structures. Specifically, the guidelines identify that masonry, which has not been painted, should remain unpainted. Additionally, the guidelines encourage that contemporary materials only be used in traditional ways. Traditionally, board and batten siding was reserved for outbuildings. So we're to provide feedback on materials and architectural details for the exterior alterations.
I will say, in my opinion, whatever design we end up doing, as long as the materials are appropriate. I disagree with the consultant about the board and batten thing. I also agree with earlier what we said. We see too much of it now. This era of a house, if we go with contemporary, we might have a totally different material. It just depends which direction we end up going. So I think it's hard to say now, based on this, what is going to be appropriate or not appropriate.
Sure.
My biggest thing regarding it is if we start altering window opening sizes, it completely changes the fenestration pattern. And if we do it on one side, it will be extremely noticeable if we don't do it on another side.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep, I would agree. I mean, it's also a lot of that question is a moot point right now because we don't really, know where we're going 100% yet on the structure. But I mean, the big thing they're trying to point out is not painting the brick, but you kind of have to in this instance. I would say, in my opinion, just for all the reasons Rich mentioned.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have, I mean, until, as you say, if you go more contemporary, that could change. I mean, Rich knows a lot of knows the materials that are appropriate in certain circumstances. So once you pick a direction, I agree with Amy, then you can start to look and see what is appropriate to that. So it's kind of hard to tell right now, but if they're appropriate, I think it's okay.
And my comment would be, I'm not comfortable if the brick is painted, because that's something the staff has really tried to enforce. And the brick issue, if the garage comes down, there'll be plenty of brick that can be toothed in. And you might have to tuck point an entire facade to get the mortar to match. But in the size of this project, tuck pointing one elevation is not going to be that substantial. There's a cost, but compared to everything else. So I think it's when openings move, in this case, that's going to drive problems of patching. There are still ways to overcome it, though, with using brick from things in parts of the project that are demolished. So I'm not so comfortable painting the brick, but I guess we'll see. The board and batten, I have this book on a bookshelf across from me about American ranches. It's filled with board and batten.
Yeah, the consultant's definitely wrong on that one. You can use
Yeah, so now you may not paint it white like we're seeing every place, but board and batten could be perfectly appropriate here, just depending on how it's used. So, so that's my 2 cents worth on that one.
I have concerns about painting the brick as well. I understand with what you presented to us, it would be a requirement, but I think that you're hearing us that the farmhouse style is not our preference in this situation. So okay, so I think that's about what we've got for you. Do you guys have any questions for us?
I got a few comments. Debbie, have you got anything you want to throw in?
No, it's just, this is really, this is all new to me. So it's very overwhelming right now, to be honest.
Sure.
Yeah, because we spent all this time putting this together, and it's like, you can't do it. So it's a lot to take in. I've heard everything you've said. I wrote it all down so that my husband, who is at a business meeting, I can translate. But I'm a little confused though. I think you talked about 2 styles, like if we go contemporary, and then also Georgian colonial. But you guys like the kind of the layout of the back and the addition and all of that is okay. And again, not being an expert on all of these types of homes, like how do we do that? Does that make sense?
Rich knows how.
Okay, Rich knows how. All right, cool.
I have confidence in Rich.
You have a good architect. He'll figure it out.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I guess, at this point, I really don't have any questions. The only other, I guess, question / comment was, originally when we bought the house, we thought we might tear it down, just because it's just so unappealing on the outside. Yeah. But as we got into it, it really became a budgetary issue for us in terms of, can we do that? And also, I didn't, is that something that you approve more than adding on?
No, we don't like to. We'd prefer not to tear down a perfect.
Right. Okay.
I think that it's really a matter of looking at the style, and Rich and Nicole Martin from staff, they'll work with you.
Okay.
They're very experienced at this, and they're both very good.
Okay. Cool. I mean, I think that's, at
I
this
know-
point, that's all I have.
I know this is tough for the first meeting, but hang in there. You'll be
Yeah. You guys do it all the time. And like I said, hopefully my questions haven't been annoying. I'm just trying to wrap my arms around it.
You need to be comfortable with this.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you again. And Rich, whatever you have.
Yeah, Kathleen, you're right. It's really a good, solid structure. The wall between the garage and the house under the roof is actually concrete block, so the house isn't going anywhere. And it's a good starting point for what we're planning to do. I just wanted to kind of summarize a little bit. I mean, it's pretty obvious we heard that the farmhouse character is probably a non-starter, so we'll look at some other options. I think I like where Amy's suggesting culinary revival, because that's a very broad genre of architecture that we can work with and still help Tim and Debbie get what they want. I also heard that the garage is probably okay to redo as long as it's appropriate for what we end up doing. And that the rear addition, Gary made the comment that it's subordinate to the main house as long as we keep it on along those lines, that you're okay with the concept of doing that. Gary, I did just want to point out two things to you. One was that I will show some 3D views when we come back with more developed designs, and we'll show how the whole composition fits on the site and how you can see it from different angles, including the shed. So that'll be in there. As far as you mentioned early on about the locating doors and windows, I probably didn't, well, I know I didn't explain this at all. The front of the house, the asymmetry is annoyingly minor. The front door is a single front door and it's just slightly off center. And the window above it is just slightly off center of the door. So it's one of those things that just, I don't know, as a designer, it makes me cringe to look at it because you want to make it symmetrical, but it's not. So that and the combination of the little bump out that wraps around from the garage was what kind of generated us restoring what I think should be the symmetry of the house. And I think that will apply even if we do a different style of it, and maybe especially if we do something more along the lines of colonial revival. Other than that, great feedback from everybody. I really appreciate it. I think there's a lot for us to take into this that we can use to work on a new iteration, and hopefully we'll be back to see you before too much longer.
I have one additional comment, and if you do choose to go like the contemporary route or to kind of replicate what you have, if you want to be strong about 1967, there's a house on my usual walking route that recently, now it is older, I think it's 1980, but it's a two-story, contemporary two-story, and they recently remodeled that, and they completely changed, like, huge addition, and I think they did an excellent job. And this is just my personal opinion, but if you want to take a little drive, you can Google Earth it, or you can Google it, because right now Google has what it used to look like. It has the old view. So if you look at Google as the old view and then drive by it, it's on McDuff Way, which is off of McDuff Drive, which is off of Bright Road. So the address is, I believe it's like, I just Googled it. It's 4180 McDuff Way. It's going to be on the, it's on like a cul-de-sac, but just if you, in my personal opinion, I think they did a good job replicating a 1980s house and making it bigger.
You know, and I don't want to make you people stay up any later than you have to, but it's an interesting time for me. I'm 62 years old, and I grew up in a split level, completely nondescript home that has no architectural character or features whatsoever. It was just a crappy house, Kathleen.
I grew up in one of those too.
And today, I'm told it's mid-century modern.
Yeah,
That's like,
who knew?
Who would have guessed that? I should have told my dad to keep it and rent it out. It was going to become more valuable.
But another thing, if you do that drive, the house on the corner that you'll pass is brick that got painted. So then you can see what that looks like.
Oh, you know that, I'm sorry, one more comment. I'm sorry. Gary mentioned about the brick. I agree that it's possible to patch brick to tuck point. This particular brick is terrible soft brick and it crumbles in your hand. And I don't know that, I think if you tried to chip the mortar off, you'd end up with just a pile of red dust, but we'll take another look at it.
Okay. Thank you all very much.
Thanks. Have a good evening.
Hang in there, Debbie.
Thank you. I'll try. Thanks.
Okay. I think we were set up for some legal training. Is that still going to occur?
That is still going to occur. So yes, thanks everyone for hanging in there this evening. We have Thad Boggs here with Frost Brown Todd, Assistant Law Director. So he is going to be providing some training. We had originally promised you earlier in the year, but we appreciate your patience. So with that, Thad, do you want to take it away?
Sure. Thank you, Nikki. I will try to keep this to a tight hour. That was a joke.
Okay, I was worried. I know at least one person we'd lose.
Don't quit your day job.
Okay. So can everybody see my slide here?
Just out of curiosity, did we kill the public meeting aspect of this event?
No, this is still a public meeting.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So any members of the
Are
public—
you going to cover that in your training, Thad?
I sure will. I sure will.
Okay.
Any members of the public who wish to sit through this are more than welcome to do so. So as Nikki said, my name is Thad Boggs. I'm an assistant law director for the city. I think I've met everybody on the commission because on the board, because we did do a new member training back in February, just before everything shut down. So some of this may be things that you've heard before, but hopefully some of it will be new, and certainly an opportunity for you to ask questions tonight or to reflect and ask questions later. Jennifer Radler is the law director for the city. So the top lawyer for the city of Dublin. I work extensively with planning, so Jenny, Nikki, Claudia, and also regularly staff the Planning and Zoning Commission meetings. Phil Hartman also works on zoning and land use issues for the city, and if I'm available often, he will pinch hit in this role. My contact information is there, so anytime you have any legal questions, please feel free to contact me. So tonight we're going to cover a few things. Firstly, the legislative versus the quasi-judicial roles that the Architectural Review Board has. That includes what is a quasi-judicial proceeding, what are ex parte communications that you'll hear us talk about sometimes, and really creating a record, which is one of the entire purposes that we have hearings before the body, is so that we have a record in case an appeal goes forward. And then next, I would cover open meetings and public records and Ohio ethics laws, which are more generally applicable to all public bodies or all public officials, and not just to the Architectural Review Board. So just general things to remember as board members on ARB, as you are a public official in this capacity. The ARB itself is a public body. And fundamentally, zoning and planning process, of which ARB is a component, regulates people's private property. And so what the courts have said the Constitution requires is that these individuals have procedural due process. And sometimes that is the property owner that has that due process owed to them, and sometimes it is adjacent property owners whose rights are affected by your decisions or the decisions of other similar boards. Procedural due process basically is just notice and a meaningful opportunity to be heard. You may have heard me say this before, but you can have two roles at least as a municipal body, either legislative, meaning making law, making new law, or quasi-judicial, where you are administering existing law to a certain set of facts that is developed before you in a quasi-judicial hearing. And so quasi-judicial is just simply similar to a court, determining controversies between the public and individuals. Now, sometimes we see these applications and we don't really think of them as controversies, but in a way they are, because this property owner has come before you as the public body asking to change the status quo of their property and asking you to apply the code to allow them to do that, or in some cases, perhaps that would be denied. And their neighbors likewise may come forward either in support or in opposition to their project. So it is similar to a court, even though often, hopefully, we don't have the adversarial back and forth that you might have in a lot of traditional court proceedings. The ARB is one of our bodies that occasionally you'll be presented with proposed code changes, or if there were a desire to add properties to the list of historic properties over which the board has jurisdiction, you would be acting as a recommending body. So taking those ideas and recommending council action either for or against them. But ultimately, that lawmaking decision rides with council, and that is something where you are free to, that is a role where you are free to listen to your neighbors outside of the hearing, see what they think about it, really kind of weigh the pros and cons of a given policy request that's being made of you. The quasi-judicial role is anytime you're issuing a board order that is coming from a quasi-judicial process, and we'll go into that in somewhat more detail. So one thing that distinguishes quasi-judicial proceedings from legislative proceedings is that the outcome is subject to an administrative appeal under a certain section of the revised code, chapter 2506, if you want to read up on it after the meeting this evening. That sets forth a process by which an applicant or another aggrieved party of a decision can appeal a local board's decision to court. In the city of Dublin's case, a person could take that decision either to the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas or to the Franklin County Environmental Court, because Franklin County is one of only a small handful of counties in Ohio that has a specialized court for matters including zoning, also property maintenance, and other land use type issues. So that can sometimes be a strategic decision which place an appellant would file the appeal. But once it gets to that appellate stage, our goal as the city's lawyers is to make sure that that goes forward on the record that has been made in front of you. Because if that record is deemed to be incomplete or faulty in some way, then the court has its own hearing, and that creates a number of challenges that we would wish to avoid. Ultimately, however, if we go forward on the record that you've created, and if it's a good record, the burden of proof is on the appellant to overturn your decision. And it is difficult to overturn a decision of a local body in an administrative appeal. But like anything else, it depends ultimately on execution. So part of that is making the good record. And how do we do that? The first thing that occurs in the meeting when Chairwoman Bryan swears everybody in, testimony has to be given under oath for us to have a record to move forward with on an administrative appeal. That is why we go through that process with everybody who is appearing and testifying to facts in front of the board. When you have your discussion then, that is why you talk about what is presented to you in the meeting itself based upon that testimony and the documents that you have voted to submit into the record. Everybody has had a chance to see them. Everybody can respond to them. So it's all out there on the floor, and it creates an open process where an applicant or a property owner, an adjacent property owner who is affected, has a chance to comment and have their voices heard. They even have the opportunity, although it seldom actually occurs, to cross-examine other witnesses. So a property owner who is applying for a given change on his or her property could be cross-examined by his or her neighbor. Like I said, that doesn't always happen, but that ability is there, and that's what helps to create that meaningful opportunity to be heard that is the bedrock of procedural due process that we provide here. So one of the questions that we often get is, what can we do outside of the meeting to prepare? And it is somewhat limited, I will say. The common question we get is, can we view the property? That is one where you can. That is a yes. It's similar to the concept of what's called judicial notice in a typical court proceeding, which is a rule of evidence where certain things that are just taken as widely known in the community, that Columbus is in Franklin County, that certain facts are just known. Judicial notice, for example, of laws that are in place. Viewing a property in its setting is similar to that. What is not similar to that is having a substantive conversation about a case that is pending in front of the body, whether that be with the applicant, him or herself, or opponents of the application, or really anybody out there in the public. So
Can I ask a question about that, Thad?
Yeah, you can.
We're a tight, close-knit community, and we all know people who are coming in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
They always say, well, since you're on the board, what do you think? My response has been, go to talk to staff. Is that the appropriate way to handle this? I feel like I'm not being a good neighbor by not having a conversation with them, but I also don't want things to come back on me later that, I might have said in casual conversation.
Right. That's a great question. And I think that's a really great response to give to people, because typically you haven't really seen the case. There has not been a record created in front of you until the night of the meeting itself.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe something has been tabled, but in other circumstances, this is the first time that you're really seeing it, and really the applicant has a chance to present it to you, and it's not just on paper in front of you. So it does endanger the proceeding to have conversations about what you think on a pending application before you're in the hearing itself. And directing the person to staff is a great way, I think, to hopefully address their concerns and be neighborly in that sense, but also uphold your responsibility as a board member here.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I know I have gone very quickly through the first few slides, so I will pause and see if there are any other questions before I jump right back in. Okay. And really the thing I would think about is how a judge should comport him or herself on an existing case in front of them. If you were to go to a judge, if you were personal friends with a judge or neighbors of a judge who had a notable case that you've been reading about in the paper, if you ask that judge, what she thought the outcome should be, she shouldn't answer that question. So just try to think of it that way, and hopefully it won't feel unneighborly to ask them to go to staff. And if they determine that they want to speak on it, they certainly have that right at the hearing. So the consequences of not having these things fall into place correctly can be reversal of the decision. Perhaps if we have a faulty record, if it comes out that there were conversations or information that was shared outside of the record created in front of the board, that board decision could be reversed and either directed to enter a new decision or directed to hold the proceedings again here. There could be a rehearing in the court itself, which has certainly increases the expense of the proceedings for everybody involved, but also can be hard to maintain that level of public participation that we try to achieve in our public meetings in the city of Dublin, because courts aren't meeting at 6:30 on Wednesday evenings. They're meeting between 11 and 4 o'clock during the week and doing so downtown. So it is less accessible to interested residents if we find ourselves having to recreate a record in court. And lastly, there could be actual litigation on the civil side related to denials of due process. So that would be kind of the worst case scenario, and something that certainly we try to avoid because it does place the city in jeopardy of financial damages. So that is it for quasi-judicial proceedings. I'll take one last break for questions on that before moving on to the more generally applicable open meetings, public records topics.
I have a question. I'm assuming this is sort of a general presentation, because if people want to appeal our decisions, they wouldn't first go to one of these bodies. They would first go follow the process here in the city of Dublin, and go to, I think it's the Board of Zoning and Planning that is the appeal body for our decisions. Is that correct or incorrect?
The BZA, yes, yeah. Board of Zoning Appeals.
So then they would be, if they then wanted to take it a step further, they're going to take it to one of these judicial bodies.
Correct.
And okay. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Have any of the ARB cases gone to appeals?
Not in my time with the city. I don't know if Jenny can comment to that.
Jenny can comment.
Yes, so we have one instance, 5051 Brand Road. That was a request for demolition, and that was disapproved, and that applicant appealed to the BZA, and they overturned ARB's. The only instance that I'm aware of.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Unless there are other questions on that topic, I will move into open meetings. So public bodies such as ARB are required to take all of their action and conduct all deliberations in an open meeting. Generally, that is a live meeting where everybody is attending in person. Right now, we are, of course, subject to special permission to meet via video or teleconference due to the coronavirus pandemic. But as it stands right now, that permission under state law would expire December 1st. So hopefully the General Assembly will get its act together and extend that authority so that we can continue to meet in a virtual setting and not risk either anyone's health or risk open meetings act violations. But the crux of a meeting is ultimately the deliberation. So technically speaking, if it's just a session such as just a Q&A session, info only, then it wouldn't technically be a meeting. As a matter of practice, Even when we do that, we tend to notice them and keep minutes, hold them open as meetings, because it is challenging to have something that is truly a Q&A session that does not become discussion among the members of the body themselves. Nor would we really want that, because we want to have that exchange of dialogue and not have it artificially stilted. So in practice, we notice such things as meetings in most cases. As I said, generally, attendance on Skype or Zoom or WebEx is not permitted, but here we are operating under that special permission. However, that does not mean that open meetings violations cannot be found through exchanges on the internet. It's developing case law, but emails and text messages exchanged among the majority of members of a body discussing public business not only would be public records, but can and have been found to be meetings for purposes of the Act where they were not public, and so violations were found. Executive session is an exception to that. Appointment of personnel. Sometimes boards such as this one might go into executive session to discuss who to select as chairman or vice chairman. Even more rarely, I would say, for a board such as this, you might go into executive session to discuss pending or imminent litigation with an attorney, such as myself for the city. More often that happens at the council level, but it wouldn't be unheard of for it to happen at the level of board or commission. And there is a special sequence of events and procedure that has to be followed to enter a lawful executive session. So if we found ourselves needing one, we would be sure to provide the proper motion language and for a roll call vote to enter the executive session. One thing, however, to note is that no decisions can ever be made in an executive session. Votes must always occur in public. Turning next to public records, that is any tangibly recorded, whether paper, electronic, other medium of recording information that pertains to the functions, organization, responsibilities, procedures of a public office. So whether that be a text, a voicemail, an email, even if it's on a private account, that can still be considered a public record. Personal notes, however, are not public records. So if you are taking your own notes during a meeting just to help you collect your thoughts, and you are not sharing those with you are not sharing the notes themselves with your fellow board members, then those notes do not become public records. So do not worry about you write down on your notes and your initial impressions of a application unless you plan on actually then sharing the notes with another member of the board, in which case they would become public records and have to be kept accordingly and potentially even disclosed if requested. Any questions on those last couple of slides? Okay. So the example I spoke about earlier, or alluded to earlier, actually comes from the city of Cincinnati, where they had 5 members of their 9-member council who were discussing a number of things: the performance of their mayor and city manager, stadium deal for the soccer team down there, and even exchanging drafts of a press release that they wanted to make. They were sued by a citizen activist, and the court found that all of the text messages and emails exchanged were public records, that they had violated open meetings law, and to add insult to injury, and the injury itself was pretty significant because of the attorney's fees that were shifted to the city. The texts and emails had to be reduced into minutes and published as such for these electronic text message meetings. And a lot of, as you can imagine, a lot of the content of it was not very flattering to anyone involved. So it also involved the search of the members' personal phones to recover items. So that is pretty close to the worst case scenario as a cautionary tale, just to bear in mind. You are also subject to Ohio's ethics laws, which if you find yourself in a situation where you think maybe if your next door neighbor is applying for a variance that well, not a variance in this case, but for a board order that would come before Architectural Review Board, that might be the time to pick up the phone and call me with that question, see whether you should participate or not in those proceedings. If a conflict is discovered, then you as a member of the board should abstain not only from the vote, but from discussion. And that would be in the meeting or certainly outside of the meeting as well.
So, Thad, I have a question. Since I live in the historic district, I'm neighbors with most of these people. I mean, how does that work? Because one of the things that they wanted was someone from the historic district.
Mm-hmm. So what the ethics laws look at is a direct and definite benefit or detriment. So being in the historic district writ large, even though it is, it's obviously not a huge area, not every property in the historic district is going to have a direct and definite benefit or detriment on you or on your property.
Mm-hmm.
A next door neighbor more likely might, but somebody who is even 4 or 5 doors down under the right set of circumstances, maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. It's very fact intensive.
Okay.
So that's why if you find yourself having a hesitation about something that you see in the packet, please feel free to call or send me an email and we can work through it. Because the other thing to note is that if you contact me or if it were Phil or Jennifer directly, those communications are subject to attorney-client privilege so that we can have a candid discussion about what the facts of a particular circumstance might be.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So another important thing to note about the Ohio ethics laws is that it does not just apply to your own personal interests. It can also, you may also have a prohibited conflict when a board member, if a case before a board member affects that board member's family member or business associate, and usually that is son, daughter, husband, wife, sister, brother, parent, or in the case of a business associate, perhaps a business partner if it affects their financial interests directly and definitely. The Ohio ethics laws also deal with other items of influence such as gifts and essentially items that could have a substantial and improper influence on the performance of a board member's duties are prohibited by the Ohio ethics law. De minimis items such as promotional pens or trinkets of the sort do not fall under that prohibition. Public officials also are prohibited from receiving or soliciting additional compensation for their public duties. And honoraria sometimes is a question for public officials where they cannot be paid to give a speech because it is perceived in the minds of the Ohio Ethics Commission to be additional compensation for their public role, unless they have a bona fide business giving speeches, for example, that existed prior to their appointment to that role. So just a couple of final items to remember. We are here as a resource for you, not only Jenny and Nikki and everybody there, but also the legal support as well. So please let us know if you have any questions. It's much easier to answer them before the meeting if they come to you before a meeting, and much easier to address any potential conflicts, for example, before they arise or before it becomes, a question that comes up in the public meeting itself. The other item I would note is that sometimes when we talk about applying the facts to the criteria that are in the code, people will say, well, what purpose does that serve? And the code is written, and these facts, every property is unique. So there is always room for discretion. Reasonable people will disagree on the application of code to facts. And our chief legal concern from the chair that I sit in is not the outcome, but the process. And so one thing that I will say for the city of Dublin and for the staff and the boards and commissions here is that we provide a really good process for people to air their interests and perspective on projects. And so thank you for that and for your interest in even having me talk to you at the end of a long night about all of these topics. It just underscores our dedication as an organization to providing this fair process for everybody. So thank you very much. And if there are any additional questions, I'm happy to answer them. Or if they come up if something comes to you after the meeting, just let me know.
Thanks very much, Thad. Really appreciate you staying up late too. Anyone have questions? You guys have? Yeah.
Do you ever, and people in your capacity, are you ever asked to just go back and review some minutes to do an evaluation if a board is functioning properly?
Question.
Just as kind of a break check exercise.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious. Is it checkup or just to see if people are running the meetings correctly? If
I have not in that particular way.
Thanks, Gary.
I knew you take it the wrong way. I meant if some of us are behaving inappropriately, that would be worth hearing too. So
I have had maybe a particular circumstance where people have asked, hey, could you take a look at this and maybe say something to whoever about it, but never as really an exercise just to sort of as a checkup, although that might be an interesting exercise just to take on from time to time and make sure that everything's working properly. A yearly physical, right?
Just a thought. I mean, some of us maybe, excluding the chair, maybe need. And now you can not just review minutes, but review visuals, and so maybe even things like tone or offhand comments. I'm just kind of curious. I think coaching can be beneficial, or checkup.
I think it's an interesting
That's an
idea.
intriguing idea.
Yeah, it is. Anything else? Okay, thank you so much, Thad. Really appreciate you coming.
You're welcome. I will sign off so you don't hear the thundering herd any longer.
Oh, yeah, from yours. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay. Vicki, do we have any communications?
We do. Jen shared an email, I think, earlier this week. So if you've not received that, I would encourage you to go back to your emails and double check. But there is going to be a joint Planning and Zoning Commission, Architectural Review Board, and Board of Zoning Appeals and City Council meeting on December 14th. So if all of you could let us know your availability and your attendance one way or another. And thanks to those of you that have already responded. That'll be at 6 p.m.
Okay, because it came on the calendar at like 2 to 3.
Okay. We'll look into that, but yeah, it'll be at 6 p.m.
6, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Anything else? Go ahead.
No, but just to clarify, it'll be virtual. So don't come to the development building.
Although it is a little concerning, I didn't realize that provision expired December 1st.
Yeah, it does expire. It's December 14th at 6 p.m.
December 14th. Got it.
Yeah. And Kathy, to your point, obviously our hope is that the legislature will provide for public bodies in Ohio to continue to do this. So
sure,
we'll keep you posted.
Okay, thank you. All right, if there's nothing else, then I say that